either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Do you hear that, Chris? The sound of angry, rattling baguettes. Rattling in other languages, like the sound of angry men.
Yes, do you also hear them in the accent of a small Cockney child? Because I do.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris, and it's Les Mis time!
We couldn't go more than one episode without you choosing a musical after I did.
Okay, so this... But if you think about it, you picked a shitty musical. I picked an arguably less shitty musical. Yeah. There's a 50-50 divide on whether or not this movie version from 2012 is good or bad. And also, our last little teeny tiny episode was French. This is also meant to be supposed to be French, and yet somehow fails to be so.
Our micro view was chosen because of this movie, though, so...
It all ties together so beautifully.
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar, Les Mis is the 2012 adaptation of the 1862 novel of the same name about an escaped convict looking to make the world a little bit better, all the while the 1832 June Rebellion looms ahead.
And in case you are not a musical person, it should be very well stated that this is not by any means the first adaptation of the book Les Mis.
Yes.
This is, in fact... I think there is one slightly newer version of Les Mis that has come out, I think, only a handful of years ago. But, this story, this book, has been retold countless times since its publishing in 1862.
Yes, and I have a little bit on that a little bit later on, too, so a little bit more in depth.
Yes, but to, set the stage, to get everyone to really understand why I chose this musical as my argumentatively okay musical. To some, this musical is great. To others, this musical is terrible. And the reason I picked this one specifically is because this version of Les Mis has gotten the most divided attention out of any version that has come before it. It is usually a highly praised, highly accredited musical. It is in the top 5 of big musicals that people love and generally understand as top-notch musicals. And then this movie came along with a top-notch cast and top-notch writing and directing, and people had very high expectations.
Yes. So, Les Mis is directed by Tom Hooper.
Yeah, we know him.
From more recently Cats, but he also did, before Les Mis, he did The King's Speech and the TV miniseries Elizabeth I.
He also did the British soap opera series EastEnders, which my grandmother liked.
Oh, interesting. The screenplay is done by William Nicholson.
Oh, yeah.
Elaine Bubel, Claude Michael Schoenberg, Herbert Kretzmer, and based on the original musical by Bublin, or Bublo?
Bublo.
Schoenberg, and based on the novel by Victor Hugo.
Yes.
Stars Hugh Jackman.
Sure does.
Russell Crowe.
Unfortunately.
Anne Hathaway.
A wonderful choice.
Amanda Seyfield.
Is good.
And Eddie Redmayne.
Did fine.
Yeah. As for Nicholson, he was one of the screenplay writers on Gladiator. But it's later known for Unbroken and 13 Lives.
Yeah, solid.
Bubel and Schoenberg, as we stated, are the original writers of the Les Mis musical.
Yes.
Kretzmer has done more music work, but besides Les Mis is only real one thing that it's the only note that he has having outside of television specials and Broadway adaptations.
Yeah, he's got a niche.
Yep. Jackman, by this point, had been in so much.
We knew him, however, I think it is needed to be said, because we've brought this up the last time we talked about Hugh Jackman. This was before everyone and their mother knew that Hugh Jackman longed for the Broadway stage. He had been in Broadway, but it was not super public knowledge that, he did acting, he was good at acting, but his true passion, his calling in his soul, according to Hugh Jackman, was song and dance. This was before all of that. And this was kind of, for the general audience, the first time they had really seen him sing.
Yeah, I can see that, because for the most part, he had been in roles like Wolverine and X-Men,
Yeah.
Van Helsing,
A delight.
Swordfish, Kate and Leopold, The Fountain, as well as Real Steel, which for some reason I put Les Mis as a much older movie than that.
Yeah, I understand. He had been on Broadway by this point, just to be clear, like, he was not new to acting with musical styling or on stage. Like, he was well versed in Les Mis. He was the one who wanted to be in Les Mis.
Mm-hmm.
But this is like well before the Greatest Showman like really brought to light like this is his passion, this is what he preferred to be doing.
Yes.
So a lot of people were not fully expecting him to be taking such a lead role, a song heavy lead role in this movie.
I can see that. I know Crow was also in a similar situation. He had started off in theater as well.
He had.
And movie-wise, he had been previously in The Man with the Iron Fist,
Yes.
Gladiator, Cinderella Man, The Quick and the Dead, and A Beautiful Mind.
And while Crow does have a decent singing voice, unlike a lot of the rest of the cast of this movie, and the only exception really for like when I say the rest of this cast that I'm making is the children actors, he had been on stage, he was not a musical stage actor.
Yeah.
So like he could sing fine, like he's a decent singer. However, there's a difference between being a decent singer and being good at musical theater. And having a passion for musical theater, which it did not work out. And we will talk much more about that.
Yes. As for Hathaway, I didn't look too much into her background, but they did keep bringing up multiple times in the commentary that her mother was one of the original, or was one of the touring members of one of the productions of Les Mis.
Anne Hathaway grew up singing. Most people, of course, knew her from her normal acting. Like, she was a well-known and loved actress at the time. But again, much like Hugh Jackman, people did not associate her with the singing part of her career. People definitely thought of her more as an actress. And this, I think, movie, Hugh Jackman, people were impressed with him. People were floored by Anne Hathaway in this movie.
Yes, and it was interesting to see like just how far she had broken away from her Princess Diary days by this point.
Oh, yes.
Having also been in Brokeback Mountain, The Devil Wears Prada, which we went over that more extensively.
A delight.
Alice in Wonderland, as well as she was in The Dark Knight that came out the same year.
Yes.
As for Seyfried, she was in Mean Girls, Mamma Mia, Jennifer's Body, and that shitty Red Riding Hood.
Yeah, I remember the
remake.
shitty Red Riding Hood remake. I enjoyed it, but yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, as well as In Time with Justin Timberlake.
Yes, and again, like, she is a trained vocalist. Like, she had the capability, but people did not know or recognize her for it, just kind of like the rest of the cast here.
Yep. As for Redmayne, he is probably more recognized as Newt Scamander in the Fantastic Beasts series.
Yes, I believe nowadays people would definitely say that, but it's not that he wasn't unknown, he just wasn't, he had not hit his stride yet.
No, he'd been in Elizabeth I, as well as an adaptation of Pillars of the Earth. But Les Mis seemed to be the movie that kind of started putting him on the path to make a name for himself.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah. And before we get into it, I do want to go over our sources for today's episode, including commentary by Toby Hooper, interview with cast and characters, Wikipedia, because I unfortunately don't have too much information on this, and there wasn't books outside of the history of Les Mis, the musical, not the movie itself.
Yeah, the movie itself, I agree. Like, the DVD really is the wealth of our information. However, I will be expanding upon that, not a ton, because it's not super important, but I also have the original book is in French and in English next to it with author notes to the side. It's a standard copy. So nothing super dramatic happens because of that, because this is not only an iteration of the book, this is an iteration of the musical, which was an iteration of a different musical of it, which was an iteration of the book.
Yeah.
So...
As well, I pulled some supplementary information from the Les Mis fan wiki.
Which, honestly, a solid source. Like, the fans of this movie are very much into this movie.
Yeah. So, Les Misérables.
The sad and miserable French.
Colloquially called Les Mis.
Yes.
As was an 1862 novel by Victor Hugo. And just a little bit about Hugo himself. He was a political philosopher and writer who had been working on a play at Tuilier's Garden, when the rebellion broke out that's featured in the movie.
Yes.
Where he followed the sounds to find the barricades being built. But he didn't start on Les Mis until 1845, and it wouldn't be released until 1862 while he was living in exile after Napoleon III's coup d'etat.
Now, if you hear the name and you think, that name sounds vaguely familiar, what else do I possibly know this man from? He is also the author of Hunchback of Notre Dame. He is well versed in French turmoil.
I thought you were bringing up Napoleon III to plug our last mic review because Napoleon III's in it.
No.
But Les Mis was actually a international success immediately.
Yes,
to the point it was popular during America's own Civil War.
Yes, and on top of that, part of the reason that the adaptations for this book were as successful as they were is because the book, much like a lot of literature of the time, was very high thinking, very philosophical, but he also had a style where just like a quarter of this book is him explaining the concepts to you, like explaining the concept of French peasantry, explaining the concept of Paris in general, creating a groundwork knowledge for his readers to understand the Paris sewer system. Like, he goes on so many tangents that literally have nothing to do with the plot. However, they paint a delightful picture and understanding of his works. He did this also a little bit with Hunchback of Notre Dame, but in a slightly different format. And because it was so immersive in the sense that, like, you didn't need to know anything about French or Paris or rebellions or literally any portion of the story without having to look anything up, he just told you it. So it was very easy for people to cling to, enjoy, see iterations of it in their own world or understandings, and then the adaptations happened almost immediately.
Yeah, no, exactly, because since then it had been adopted into other languages, sequels, comics, and even a manga that I found out there's a whole series of manga adaptations of classic literature.
Yes, there is, and honestly, they're kind of good if you need a Cliff Notes version of them.
Yes, but we don't give a shit about any of that. We are here solely for the film adaptations.
And specifically, this film adaptation, because this isn't the only one.
No. Though not in musical form, the story was adapted first in 1897 by none other than the Lumiere brothers, some of the earliest founding fathers of cinema.
Yes.
And just cameras in general. In a very short form, it's like 1 minute and 16 seconds or something like that.
It's the most Cliff Notes versions of this story physically possible. Because the story is huge. And
it survived, and it is called Victor Hugo et les principaux personnages des Misérables.
Alright.
But since then, there have been a lot of silver screen adaptations, TV movies, miniseries, 47 from what Wikipedia has, although these do also include spin-offs of the work or based on Les Mis, as well as sequels that aren't really sequels.
Yeah, because once you actually understand the actual history that is supposed to be shown in Les Mis, it's lacking. This is not the Great French Revolution. This is a very small portion. A 2-day riot, really. So there is room, if you are a creative writer, to expand greatly upon this world.
The Braveheart riot of the French.
But actually, okay, that's a great way to explain it. And that is one of the criticisms of this movie, actually, is that it gets a little bit too close to, Braveheart, Passion of the Christ styles and times.
Historical epics.
Yes, where it's a little too over the top for its own good. This one does manage to skirt a lot of that criticism because it's a musical, and that covers a lot of problems.
Oh yeah. I even learned that there's a couple Japanese adaptations of Les Mis out there.
I desperately wish to see this.
Yeah. Well, I've been stumbling upon some random Japanese adaptations of Western media. I found out there's an adaptation of the Clint Eastwood movie Unforgiven with Ken Watanabe. Okay,
that would be dope, though.
I am gonna try and find it at some point. So
please let me know when you do. I desperately want to know who they cast to replace Clint Eastwood.
I didn't look at who was who, but I know Ken Watanabe's in it.
You know what? It's probably good.
Yes, but before it became a musical, Les Mis was originally a French concept album.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it first wasn't adapted to stage until 1980 as a sung-through musical, which the movie itself uses live singing and music off to the side where the actors had earpieces so they could hear and sing along.
But specifically, they were not listening to the full orchestra set.
No.
And we'll get into why that's important for me to point out later. But they were listening to a piano rendition to sing along with. And this was hugely advertised. This was a selling feature of the movie.
Yeah, no, for some reason.
I'll explain more later.
Okay.
Specifically when we get to Mr. Crow.
But it was not developed into an English language adaptation until 1985 by the Royal Shakespeare Company at Barbican Center.
Yep.
Probably butchered that too.
It's okay. Everyone knows who the Royal Shakespeare Company is.
Yes.
So it's okay.
The musical itself is the second longest running musical in the world after the original off-Broadway run of The Fantastics.
Yeah. And this is one of those ones that it will not ever die. This musical will run until the end of time.
Yeah. And yeah, this is where I stop caring about the musical and where we'll get into the movie. So before we do that, Chris, what are we drinking today?
Well, in true French fashion, you have found a red wine, but not just any red wine. A red wine with criminals on the front.
19 Crimes or whatever it was called.
Yeah, that one, where they've got a bad guy on the front, and then you can read about him.
An English dude who I guess it's fitting. Cheers.
Cheers. It's never the best wine, but it's always passable.
Wine's wine, it still gets you drunk.
That is one way to look at it.
So, Les Misérables.
Yes. Let us begin one of the most sad and muddy musicals to ever appear on the silver screen.
Yeah. We open on a flag in the water, and it is set, we get the setting of 1815. 26 years after the start of the French Revolution, our king is once again upon the throne of France.
Boy, that hurt me.
Good.
But honestly, that is something that a lot of people weren't super excited about with this movie, is this movie's a little all over the place when it comes to accents. And part of that was because they had the actual actors singing, and we have a very wide range of accents coming into this movie. Yeah,
and I know I brought this up to you earlier because heads up, we have a couple historical movies coming up.
We do.
And I think it's funny, and I don't know how it took me so long to realize. Anytime we have anything set in Europe in the past, as an English language film, we just cast pretty much Brits.
Yes,
and Australians, obviously.
I was going to say, Hugh Jackman would kindly remind you.
Yeah, Russell Crowe's also an Australian. Technically was born in New Zealand.
That is a huge technicality. My apologies.
Yeah.
But, for a French film, there is a lack of French people in the main cast, which, because this is a star-studded movie, most people weren't really upset about that. And also, this is, the 1 billionth iteration of Les Mis. People did not care anymore. What people did care about was some of the characters added an English accent, despite fully being able to put on just a standard Hollywood English accent.
Yes.
And luckily it's not the worst at the beginning of the movie. It's really noticeable at the end of the movie. But it was something that bothered a lot of people. The accent is almost as bad as your French accent.
Oh yeah, no, and mine's purposely bad, so...
Yeah. In his defense, he was a child, so...
I am a child at heart.
Uh-huh. I hope no child ever sounds like that.
I'm gonna just ostracize any French listener we've had in the past year again.
Yeah, apologies, but not a lot, because it is funny.
Yeah, so we open on the shipyard in our first song of Look Down.
A solid song.
Which, honestly, the opening scenes are strong. They do a good job at making Les Mis look like an oppressive... it's
muddy
just a
hole.
oppressive muddy hole under one man specifically. Again, reflection of the king above.
Yes.
But I don't know why, and maybe it's just from the play or the musical version.
Okay.
I remember this being a quarry for some reason in the original, maybe?
You know what? There was a lot of changes made for the movie version in general, not just from the previous musicals, which also made changes from the original book adaptation, because of the book adaptation, which we'll talk about later, there are other characters that are just not mentioned in this movie version at all.
Mm-hmm.
People have parents who just, you now get to assume that person's an orphan. Yeah, locations change, who says what changes throughout the whole movie. Like, if you are looking for a very faithful adaptation, this is not it. However, this is a good adaptation for movies, because while I agree the quarry, like, makes somewhat more sense than a muddy shipyard, however, for a very short time frame, this scene sticks out. This stuck in people's heads. This song is very catchy. The fact that it's, like, Monty Python level muddy really stands out. Sure, there's some inconsistencies as far as who's standing where doing what, but no one really cares.
Yeah. Well, and part of it is Hooper wanted the movie to start with the idea of staying under a sea of misery.
Well, he succeeds in that.
Yeah. As well, he wanted the warship to be a symbol of the vulnerability of power.
I see what he means. I don't think most people caught that. I think this...
No.
And I think the reason that most people don't necessarily catch the large, direct symbolism that he tried to put into, especially this part of the movie, because I think part of the reason is it's honestly kind of hard to tell what's happening. Everything is wet, everything is muddy, everyone is dirty minus one man, and even he's a little dirty.
Yeah.
I think what stuck with people, not only the catchiness of this song and, like, the memorability of it, but also this specifically was the scene that people were like, this is getting a little bit too close to Passion of the Christ versus, like, Braveheart in its symbolism and how it was filmed.
Okay.
And those movies were much more recent than they are now. I know you and I have, like, forced to watch them recently, so, like, they're fresher in our minds than the general populace, I think, who probably don't rewatch those movies, hopefully, ever.
I think the overdramatic artsy sky makes me think of more like 300.
Yeah, that was also very much in the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah.
The song helped a lot, I think, with a lot of people's interpretation of it, but it definitely did muddy people's symbolism, like, comprehension. Because, yeah, when the director's going through and being like, oh, yeah, I purposely picked a warship, I purposely picked these angles and the shakiness of the camera, and Hugh Jackman's talking about how he lost a ton of weight for this specific scene, like, he went
Water fasted and all that shit.
Went for crazy long runs, like, he purposefully tried to make himself look like sunken cheeks, hollowed out eyes look, which, please don't, we like you alive. But, like, the amount of passion that went into it, a lot of people unfortunately missed because the scene is so wet and muddy.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, I mean, we have the little bit where he carries the French flag, which is, in a way, it's kind of symbolic of he, as a person, is carrying the weight of France on his shoulders.
Honestly, this character carries the weight of the plot on his shoulders, so, like, I'll take it.
Kind of. Yeah,
In the book, these characters were divided up. The book is divided very hard. Like, there's chapters and subplots. It's very written like a poem almost, where there's, like, breaks constantly.
Games of Thrones-esque.
Yeah, but worse.
Okay.
And so, like, there was room for every character to have, like, a designated quote-unquote chapter or section. Whereas the musical had to tie everyone together and show this, like, overlapping story plot of, like, how everyone is happening at the same time.
That explains a question I have for you at the end of the movie.
I figured. Because while I do think that I like this version's storytelling and pacing quite a lot, it takes a lot of inspiration from the more newer musical versions of it as far as pacing and how we are showing converging storylines while only having one stage or one camera to deal with. It doesn't necessarily, like, help, because in the book it does, like, spread the character load out quite a bit, whereas in this one, Jean Valjean is kind of our only man who does anything. Yeah. Which, I mean, it works because I like Hugh Jackman, but...
Yeah, and...
It does kind of imply that this man is the entire reason for the French Revolution, which isn't true, but, like, it's kind of leading to it a little bit.
Kind of there for it.
Yeah, sort of.
But we learned that his number is 24601, so fitting because his name is Jean Valjean.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes with the pacing of 24601.
Yeah, and much like all other musical nerds, that number is now forever burned into people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
People know this number off the top of their hearts, just like people know how many seconds there are in a lifetime.
I don't.
It's a different musical that we will get to, and I promise.
Wait, that's a musical?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Oh my god, I thought you were actually, like, meaning the actual people knew the numerical number of seconds in someone's average lifespan.
No, it's the song.
I don't know.
It's okay. That's a different sidetrack. But yeah, this song is catchy enough that, like, not only is the normal musical something that, like, musical fans put on a regular playlist, the movie, despite people bitching hardcore about these singing and all of that, people bitched hardcore. However, this is still, like, one of the number one musicals to be added to people's playlists, and, like, especially if you're a musical fan, like, this will be on there. There's no escaping it. There's this song, I Dream a Dream, and then the end song. Those are gonna be on somebody's playlist. You will know them.
Yeah. Well, and specifically at this point, I'm not a fan of Crow's singing at all.
No, and this I do think it gets better. I
agree. It gets better, just unfortunate that...
It's the first song!
Yes.
Especially because Hugh Jackman's singing for this, like, it starts off very strong. Like, his acting commitment, which honestly, the passion and commitment is what makes this movie. Like, for those of us who stand behind this full-heartedly, like, that is why we think this is a better rendition than the stage musical versions. And then people are on the opposite side of the coin. They think the singing is better in the stage musical versions than in this more acting-based roles.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was a general understanding from most of the cast and crew that, like, they were going to come at this as hard as possible. Everyone was going to do the most to portray their sad, miserable French lives in this movie. And while Crow does do a good job, he is by far the weakest link, and unfortunately he's also, like, well known.
The main antagonist.
He's in, like, every other scene. Yeah, which, that sucks, because, like, his singing does get better, but it's too late. This song is what sold him.
Better is, like, if here's Russell Crowe, we're at the bottom of the tier list, it's like he goes up just above chorus member.
Yeah. Which sucks. But the reason we harp on this so much is, like, this movie regularly gets a 50-50 split with not just critics, but also fans, and Russell Crowe's performance is a leading cause of the 50-50 split.
I see it. But to be fair, this scene is a good scene outside of that. It shows the dehumanization of the criminals, even though their plight is easily justified.
Yes.
I mean, we find out he stole a loaf of bread to save his starving sister or whatever.
Yeah. What was me?
Yeah, just also showing the unfairness of France at the time.
And also just, like, a commentary on a continuing problem that part of the reason why the story of Les Mis has maintained for so long is the arguing of unfairness of having a record follow you permanently for the rest of your life. Even if that record is, by Les Mis standards, unfairly and unjustly given.
Mm.
He stole a single loaf of bread for his starving sister child.
I mean, they did that's part of the reason, like, we have the weight and measurement for bread that we do now is because of trying to make sure that the bakers didn't screw over the people. Yes,
but, like, this is why this story, not just the movie, not just the musical in general, because the music and the movie are both, like, very catchy and very popular, but the story itself, the core of it, this is why this has made it to be sustained for as long as it has.
Yeah. So, Jean Valjean, 24601, is now put on a trek to find a new place. We get a little bit of symbology of graves along his path. That it's a constant reminder that he's set for death, basically, unless he breaks the law again. Unhirable, setting up the stakes that he's on parole forever, and if he fails to show up, boom, right to jail.
Right to jail for you.
And he eventually ends up sleeping in a graveyard. Also, this was before the graveyard, like the mountain that he was on.
Yeah.
It's like the only part that was filmed in France.
Yeah, well, you do what you can.
Yeah. But he's saved by a pastor who's portrayed by Colm Wilkinson, who played the original Jean Valjean in the London casting.
How poetic.
Yeah. Which I do think there's something interesting that they bring up is that since he was the original, he made the character his own. And he also told Jackman to do the exact same thing, even though like he set the precedent. Do your own thing with it. You don't copy me. Do something interesting.
And I would say most of the cast did follow in that like advice. There's a handful of characters who there's not a lot you can do with them. And then there's a handful of characters, which we'll get to, which unfortunately still are stuck in a very specific pigeonhole, which we will cover when we get to them. But like, there's only so far you can go with being a sad, dirty person. And they were already in a pigeonhole of sad, dirty people for a typecasting. So, yeah, that's part of people's like back and forth on whether or not this is a good adaptation, because not only is there a lot of interpretation on styling from just about everybody, but also for a movie version, which usually movie versions go above and beyond to expand the stage that you get to see. You get to see more of Paris, you get to see more of Phil in whatever spot we're in here. The whole movie is dark and dreary and muddy, which means it is very hard to see what's going on, because unlike other movies where they shot the quote-unquote night or dark scenes in blue light to make it so you could still see.
Or day for night shots.
Yeah. This one went for the whole, like, it's dark, you can't see nothing shit. Which unfortunately gave it a very Sweeney Todd styling.
I got something that might tie this movie to Sweeney Todd later, too.
Yeah, it's a lot of people did.
But, the betrayal and his recapture.
Oh, no.
I do enjoy the shock on the nuns' faces as the pastor forgives him in front of them.
Yeah.
And also just the confusion on Jackman's face.
Jackman's acting was top tier for this movie, not gonna lie.
Yeah, and it's a short scene. I mean, he's given his forgiveness, and it's time for repenting. And this scene, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of his singing either, because I think this movie, for the most part, was filmed chronologically.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people were having issues on when it was supposed to be sung, I think, or sung through, where it was like dialogue that was supposed to be sung through, or actual singing.
Yes, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was a lot of people's complaints when this movie first came out, to the point where my own family and in-laws went to go see this movie, and as we left the theater, they bitched about that very thing.
Good.
Yes.
Music nerds.
Yeah, truthfully. For some of us, it was fine, and like, I honestly didn't care the first time I watched this, even in theaters. I'm not terribly picky on the whole singing through a line or lyric, especially because we had some very over-the-top acting happening, and I kind of prefer that for a movie version. I think it's nice to be able to like get in close with the actors, because normally on a stage production, unless you're dishing out for front row seats, you do lose a lot of that. You're kind of relying on the sound portion and the over-the-top like gestures to really get what's going on. Whereas with a movie, we can get as close as we want to Hugh Jackman's face. So like, it didn't necessarily bother me. However, I agree. I think there was a tonal shift from the first part of the movie, when most people were just kind of sing-saying their way through it, to the end where we had full-on ballads and proper singing. And people noticed, and it is a little inconsistent. And I think if they had stuck with one, or even bothered to reshoot some more stuff, because they didn't really, they kind of filmed from start to end and kind of went through it.
Yeah, they had like 3 or 4 shots, and then also like they had a very short practice time frame.
They had a very
rehearsal time frame. Sorry,
they had a very short rehearsal time frame, and even less like prep for the actual actors and actresses. Something Anne Hathaway was a little upset about was the fact that she didn't have a whole lot of time to learn all of the parts and lines, because not only is this, like, this isn't the standard musical. Something to note is a lot of the pieces were, they changed the keys to fit what they thought the actor could sing better. Which, you know, do what you can. They're actors. But because of that, those who were more, like, traditionally trained, like Anne Hathaway, were a little upset they didn't have time to truly, like, practice and get into some of the more difficult portions that they still had. Like, higher notes. She was not happy she didn't have enough time to practice and train.
Yeah, I don't blame that.
Yeah.
But there are some good things about the scene. It's a pretty church.
It is. It's very pretty.
I also think that it's the way they portray the back and forth of him going through his thoughts and using the hallway to, like, when he's on train of thought. Yeah. And then he's like, but wait, what about this? What about that? What about this? It's a good way to convey his back and forth, trying to think through what just happened in his head. And something that I never thought of, but Hooper put it out, is that musicals allows for these soliloquies.
Yes, they do. That
standard movies don't. But in an opposite side, because since people are finding out through one of our recent episodes, our last episode with Caliph, that I vastly hate flashbacks.
Yeah.
I've learned some of my friends hate dream sequences.
That I can understand.
But I think in a way, cinema allows that dream sequences can be used as a way to state the mental state of a character without having to say it like a musical would.
Oh, I agree. I do think, though, that this movie had an interesting problem because this movie came out, the musical was very well known and loved, and honestly was the main starting point for most fans. Like, most people were not familiar with the BBC aired radio version of this piece. Surprise, surprise. So there is some adaptation work needed on how do you accurately portray a stage version of an actor or actress walking back and forth, monologuing to themselves, without it looking dumb in a movie. And I do think this one did a good job of that.
Chris, I have a confession to make.
Oh, tell me.
Les Mis was the first musical I was involved in.
I'm so proud of you.
I have a history with this musical. It was in high school, and I did run crew for it. So
I'm so proud of you. So then you understand that there's a lot of musicals where people just stand on stage talking to themselves.
Yes, I'm very well aware.
Or there is an overcast narrator who sometimes stand off to the side and is an actual person, like in Joseph They Made Technicolor Dreamcoat. Or sometimes is just a disembodied voice that speaks to the characters from the heavens. In Les Mis, most of it was handled by the cast walking back and forth talking to themselves.
We had a really cool rotating stage.
That would be so cool.
Or at least there was like a turning stage at the front of it. And for those, if it's out there anywhere, the Papillion La Vista 2006 play of this, if you see someone with white socks on the run crew, that's me. But I don't know if you know how I used to be pretty heavily involved in theater up until about like first couple years of college.
I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, so I have a little more crew work. So I mean, I think it shows like my love for film and the background shit.
Sure. I just think that this is one of those like very good representations because we've seen other movies that try and do theater-like, and some of them are more successful than others as far as like setting and stage and camera work, but one of the huge hurdles is how do you get your characters to figure out the plot and trauma of their character without looking like an absolute crazy person.
You try and use the background to be a symbolism for him, because he breaks out, like he's done with his song, or he ends his song by breaking through the church, or not breaking through, running through the church doors, kind of reborn from the graveyard from whence he was going to be destined to fly.
Exactly.
But from here we cut to 8 years later in 1823, and Valjean, or Javier, has arrived at a new post.
Yes.
Or not Javier, Javert.
There you go. Wrong noises.
Wrong language.
There you go.
And we get the poor people. They're so downtrodden.
There's so much mud still.
Yep. The plagues are coming to kill, which, by the way, at the time, there was a cholera epidemic. Something that would also be partly responsible for sparking the rebellion that killed Jean-Maximilien Le Marquis.
Yes.
Who, well, while mentioned in the movie, it was a major critic of the new French monarchy, which is kind of an important part of the movie, but not really at the same time.
So something that's interesting about the movie is that the rebellion isn't really a very large portion of the movie.
No. It's like the last, 20 minutes, if that.
Yeah, which...
For almost 2 hours, to remind you.
Yes. But while that is true, and honestly kind of funny...
Sorry, over 2.5 hours.
Oh my god, yeah, I forgot how long this one is. But, yeah, while it is a little funny that, what most people would think to be, the main point of history at the time, really isn't, because, honestly, this portion of the French Rebellion wasn't as big as some people might think it is. This is a small little bit of the sadness and turmoil that was the French at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it is a good way of trying to show that their lives are really hard. They're sectioned off from the rest of the main part of Paris. Or, we're not in Paris.
Not yet.
I forget what city we're in.
It doesn't matter. It's muddy. And it's wet. And everyone probably has trench foot.
Yeah, probably. But we also get to see the factory that Valjean is now kind of in charge of. He's also le maire.
The mayor. Good for him.
Yeah. Also, I don't know why everyone hates Fantine.
For fun. I don't know.
She's the new girl, doesn't fit in, I guess, or quiet. I don't know.
I think there's supposed to be something else there. I mean, it's explained more depending on, the older versions. The movie doesn't explain... honestly, a lot of bits and background about these characters. Half of the characters have more to them. But it doesn't really matter.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, she ends up getting fired because she's hiding a child, and there's rumors that she's sleeping around.
Yeah.
Which some doth protest too much.
Yes, well, this is one of those things where, if you feel like it, there's a whole interesting, fascinating history with workforce and, what would have been considered charity workforces or workhouses at the time, ranging in a lot of different scenarios. It doesn't matter for this movie, just honestly, this character gets tortured for the sake of sadness and to be a symbol for women and the lower class in general at the time.
Yeah.
So.
How the society corrupts the good, because all she wants to do is work to send money home to her child. Yeah,
it's one of those things where, the movie, especially the movie version of this story, makes everyone very black and white. There's no, person whose motives for the quote-unquote wrong that they've done was that bad or impure.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people who, we're focused on here are, meant to be almost saint-like.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know he tries to muddy the water with Valjean
a little bit, but again, he cuts out a lot of backstory to almost all of the characters, which is good. This movie's already too fucking long.
Yeah,
but it does if you were to be like us and looking at this as a movie, unlike everyone else who watched a adaptation of their favorite musical, there are holes and questions left unanswered.
Yeah. And so, despite him potentially going to resolve the issue and actually be kind of a good person...
Yeah,
which, they don't really do a good job of building up that he's a good person other than he's now the mayor.
Yeah, again, they cut out so much backstory for everybody.
Yeah. We get distracted by Javert in our very classic meme.
Yeah.
Which, Hooper said that this was added to give a reason why Javert or Valjean would not have sought to resolve the fight in the factory.
I don't care. All I know is that everyone in this movie has the same facial blindness that I do, and cannot recognize someone, despite the fact that everyone looks pretty much the same.
Oh, yeah. Because, he's looking down his phone, and I know, I get what they're trying to go for.
I know, too.
He has a gray patch now, and they're supposed to be this... The reason he lost all the weight and gained it back was so that way he looked like a different person, and it's
okay, and I have known people who have done the big weight transformations in both directions, and yes, some of them even family members you generally do look like a different person. However, while I applaud Hugh Jackman's effort and commitment to the role, he did lose a ton of weight for the role, and do not underestimate that there.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hugh Jackman, unfortunately, is the wrong actor for such a transformation because he has such a distinct-looking face that even with full beard, long hair, and weight change, he still looks like Hugh Jackman without any question, and I can recognize him, which means the man looks exactly the same, I think.
He went from anorexic Wolverine to just
Normal.
regular French Wolverine.
Yeah, and, like, I agree that, like, over-the-topping it with makeup and costume, which was something that they didn't really do.
Mm-hmm.
I do applaud them for that because this movie already gets way too close to several other dark and stoic-styled movies who are very specific, and a lot of these actors and actresses had already starred in.
Mm-hmm.
And also were musicals. I agree, that was not the correct direction to go. However, it is a kind of a running joke that no one in this world can recognize anyone.
No. For some of them.
Especially this man.
Yeah. But I do think the scene is good in trying to build the suspicion and them kind of testing each other out.
Oh, sure. Like, acting-wise, this is probably some of the better... Like, this is where Crow starts to get better, at least acting-wise, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really have a whole lot to act with at the beginning. It was mostly just singing and handing out a piece of paper, which is upsetting. I do think the acting from him is decent.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a very song-heavy musical.
Well, I mean, it's sung pretty much the entire time.
Yeah, like, the list of songs in this was actually cut down from the musical version. And not only just in how many songs there are, I think they only cut 2 songs from the, like, popular version of the musical. They even cut some of the songs, like, down in half, or even to just phrases to be able to fit them all into the movie. And still, this movie's so fucking long. So, like, I get it.
Yeah.
But also, like, come on. Something, anything here.
No, exactly. And on top of that, Javert's doubting of his old man's strength is, like...
It's a little insulting, because, I mean, it's not that old.
It is, but I think it's also just kind of like their way of trying to build it up. And it's there to show that the respect the title gives you, where it's like...
Yeah, you do get a lot of, like, pass for being the mayor.
Yeah, exactly. But Hooper said that specifically their confrontation scene took some figuring out since it was a new scene, and the music and the natural dialogue had to work with already the pre-established elements. And
I agree.
to that, I will say I think they did a good job. It fits right in.
I agree. I don't think it necessarily, like, detracts or is distracting. I think it adds.
And from here, we cut immediately from anything else to do with those two to Fantine's Descent.
Ah, yes, Fantine.
Where we get our next little song of Lovely Ladies.
Which is, for some reason, sung in a terrible English accent.
It is awful.
It is the second worst English accent in the movie. Being holding out for a different character much later in the film, unfortunately.
Yeah. Which, the other thing I have with this movie, and maybe just in general, is that Fantine's descent into...
It feels quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really quick. Like,
yes, it's, I don't think, meant to be that quick.
And I know in the musical it does happen pretty quickly too.
Well,
And
like, musical, you got a limited amount of time before people pee their pants.
yeah, and I know that at the time jobs were harder to find, and like
especially for a single lady. Yes.
Yeah. Well, like, okay, that's maybe why she was hiding Cosette.
Yes. Children were not welcome in the workforce unless they themselves were the workforce.
Yeah. Which, yeah, it's real quick. Very quickly, she's shaving her head, which she did shave her real hair, which...
And on film, which was a big deal, and another big selling point for the movie.
Yes, as well as showing her teeth in her youth, basically. But I think... here's why I think it works really well, is that... she does really look sad in shaving of her head.
She looks miserable.
Yeah, kind of like Natalie Portman in V for Vendetta a bit.
Yeah, no. People made that connection too. And, like, everyone, minus, unfortunately, Russell Crowe, had, like, widely agreed that the acting was phenomenal, but Anne Hathaway stood out. People really, like, this put her above and beyond The Princess Diaries for a lot of people.
Well, and on top of that, like, there's little things that happen in this progression that happen very early on that I think, if you're not paying attention, are easily missed.
I think they are super easily missed.
She has small little coughs through a good chunk of this part, which is to show that she's not doing well.
Yeah, on top of, looking like she just would like to stop existing.
Yeah. Can we also talk a little bit about, like, some of the costuming for this? Because
it's beautiful.
Yes and no, because, like, the head pimp.
Yes.
He looks like he's trying to be the Mad Hatter of sex workers.
Yeah, so, again, there were some actors and actresses who are much better known for Danny Elfman's styling.
Okay.
Where it's much more over the top, it's much more cartoony, and they are used to the dark humor / horror-esque line to toe. And so there was a lot of work needed to make sure that line wasn't supposed to be super apparent in this movie. Unfortunately, when you're typecast, like, that just follows you. People see your face on screen and they, like, that's what you think of.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that's also, like, you're in the midst of acting that style. So, like, there is some styling that, like, did definitely leak through, which is not supposed to be there.
Luckily, he's barely in the movie.
I agree. And while I do like his performance, at least from, like, a tee-hee-ha-ha sort of standpoint, I do think that is why a lot of people put this lower than the stage production for them.
Or is he supposed to be more of, like, a circus?
No, he's meant to be more of, like, a guy with bad fashion sense. He's supposed to be someone who, like, once he gets money, he spends it, and he's bad at spending it. He picks the most ugly piece of expensive clothing he can find, sort of guy. But because he's been typecast already into outlandish roles, whose costuming is known for being over the top and outlandish, and honestly kind of a style set for the time, it doesn't read as a man who's bad at picking out his own clothes. It reads as costuming suddenly went in a different direction.
Okay, I can see that. But she does quickly fall into the line of work. I do think the boat motif works a lot better in this scene.
I agree.
Where...
partially because you can fucking see the boat.
Well, that, and also, they're kind of like sirens pulling men into...
Yes,
doing the opposite of pulling them out of the water, but pulling them into the boat.
Well, so think about everything in this movie from, like, a very moral high ground, which was how the stories were originally written, was, like, looking at and commenting on specifically the religious workings. Like, there's an entire section of the original book that talks about how, like, religion is a sham, but also it's the only thing holding the moral threads of this, like, terrible life together. And without it, we descend into gross nothingness. But also, it's not good. Like, it's both are corrupt. Hunchback of Notre Dame, great example of his feelings and thoughts about the church. But he also felt very much that without it, like, people would just run amok.
Necessary evil, basically.
Yeah. And so, like, whereas that one specifically was looking at religion and a very specific religion and how they treated the populace, this one was looking at it from, like, the bottom up. And so, like, yeah, the movie does not explain any of this because it does not have time. We've already cut so much. But something that I do think some people liked, I didn't, was the sets for this were purposefully done rather vague. It's meant to be French. It's meant to be Paris. There's not a lot of landmarks to pull from. There's a handful, which is disappointing. This is France. There should be quite a few.
Well, we're still in middle of nowhere France, basically.
I know, but even middle of nowhere France has something to look at other than mud. But part of the reason they did this was to, like, add to the illusion that the stage production would have had. Like, the stage production you cannot have as full and elaborate as a set as a movie possibly can. That's just how it works. Like, you have a limited resource and space to deal with. I am of the opinion that when you do a movie version of a stage production, unless you are going over the top, like, cheese to make it look like a stage, which we've talked about before in some of the Japanese adaptations of stuff, I want a full-fleshed background. I want to look at, like, and dissect the background of every scene. This movie did not take that standpoint. This movie went very vague to match the theme of the theatrical version, which was much more focused on character, dialogue, and music. Fine, not my taste.
I think you would really like Mishima, Life in 4 Parts.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, but one thing I do want to note is that I think there's some little detailing in this scene that is nice.
Sure.
Where she is doing the deed.
Coffin-esque.
Casket.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also that he just tosses the money at her.
Rude.
Yeah.
Put it in her hand. Be a gentleman. But there are no gentlemen here, are there?
No, not at all. And we get probably the best song of this entire movie.
It is by far the most moving.
Dream to Dream.
It's so good.
Which, amazing use of lighting while still trying to instill the feeling of, like, hope while also her breaking.
And I think for a lot of people, this was the part that swayed a lot of the critics who did not like the acting singing, which we get more of later. This, I think, was the one song that people said, like, if the acting singing had been this dramatic and intense for all the other songs, I would have been fine with the acting singing. Because this song is powerful. This is really well done. Her acting goes perfectly with it. This is where I think the play of, like, the live singing works. However, it is impossible to keep this intensity for the whole movie.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think part of it, too, is they were trying to make the rest of it a musical and, like, pretty and nice.
Yes.
And Hathaway said specifically that she couldn't sing the song pretty.
No.
And I think that's why it shows, is because, yeah, it sounds great, but it also sounds heart-wrenching and just all, like, emotional. I'll say that's what it sounds. How it feels.
Fully agree. And then after this fantastic performance, her character drops dead and we don't see her again till the end of the movie.
Yeah, because...
a little disappointing, but, like, I get it.
Yeah, because immediately from this we go to Valjean giving out money to the needy while Fantine's being harassed.
Again, Valjean might as well be a saint.
Yeah, no, exactly. And,
I don't think the movie does a good job of explaining why he is being saintly. In the book, they explain that he is living with a guilty conscience, and, like, he is doing everything in his power to make up for said guilty conscience for stealing a loaf of bread to save his starving loved ones.
Excuse me, he also stole candlesticks and was given them back.
Which in the...
Or, sorry, he didn't steal candlesticks, he was gifted candlesticks.
Yeah, well, in the book, it's, like, I think several pieces of silver, not just the candlesticks.
He stole the silverware plates and left the candlesticks, and then when he returns, the priest gives him the candlesticks.
But, like, you know, not on me to say who and what your guilty conscience should hold you to do. However, some petty theft, 2 instances of very petty theft that you've done hard jail time for.
You know, hide in plain sight, baby.
You know, he is doing that.
Yeah.
But something that, like, I don't think the movie really explains very well, because, like, the book's argument when you're reading it is compelling. Once you step outside the book world, it feels a little silly, but, like, whatever. This is where I think background of the world, without dialogue, without more song, just background, in costuming, in set design, in lighting, would have been really nice, because it just kind of comes across as this man is Mother Teresa that they accidentally imprisoned.
Yeah, because there is very little of, like, scenes that have no dialogue or any singing whatsoever.
Yeah, there's very little no singing in this movie at all.
And when it is, it's small transitional pieces of, like, 8 years later.
And honestly, most of it is just pretty shots for pretty sake.
Yeah.
They're very movie poster forward.
Yeah, which Javert just happens to be there on a night patrol as well.
You know, he's, you know, saying his well wishes to his nighttime lady friends.
Yeah, but, I mean, this scene's also used to just show that despite all his kindness and philanthropy, he still fails to save someone.
Yeah, which, again, like, those who are really into this movie see and, like, go into so much more of the emotions than I think most people watching this, which is why this has a, like, 50-50 split for, like, who loves it and who's just like, it's fine. Because it would be nice with a little bit better direction, a little bit better costuming. I love costuming. I love period costuming. This costuming's not that great, I'm not gonna lie. It's very dry. It's very bland. It doesn't show off character very well. There's only one character who, like, uses it in any way, and because he's the only one, he comes off as a weird clown. Same thing with his lady friend. Like, They just come off clown-esque.
Default French peasant.
Yeah, and honestly, like, it's not even very good French peasant clothing. Like, it's not very historically accurate. It's also not very telling. There's no color used. Everything's black and gray and white. It's kind of boring.
I mean, the whole movie's in English, so...
Yeah, I can get around that, though. With the proper, like, added little trivets, added little bits, I can get around it. And this one doesn't do it.
Yeah. Well, because immediately after he takes Fantine away, Javert receives a letter in French, mind you.
That's true. The whole thing is set in France.
Yeah.
They just don't speak any French.
No, which is...
It's strange, yeah, I agree.
It is very odd. But I do like that when he reconfronts Monsieur Lemire.
Mm-hmm.
He in a way is pure to the point where, like, he lives up to his own standards.
Yeah, an impossible standard.
Yeah, because to us, unless I didn't translate the letter at all.
Oh, don't worry, I don't think you missed anything.
Apparently, he's misunderstood that Monsieur Lemire is not 24601. They've already caught 24601, and now let's forces Valjean to face another one of his conundrums of...
The man has too many morals, and I think that's his problem.
Yeah, does he reveal himself and go back to jail, or and screw all the other workers under that depend on him, or does he let another man go to prison for his sake?
There could be some more argument going on here. However, the movie and musical make it for us, so it doesn't matter.
No, because as much as he wonders, he immediately goes to the courthouse to say that he is 24601, which, again, is a way to show his status, because they're like, no, you're not well. Of course, our benevolent Lemire is sacrificing himself for this escaped convict.
Yeah, again, like this, the movie tries to do what the book and the original story, and like even honestly some of the earlier musicals. I do think the later musicals, much like the movie, lose a lot of the moral conflict unless you spend an absorbent amount of time studying it for like the material itself instead of just watching the musical portion, which is what most people do. I do think it loses the like true moral conflicts that the original author, like, that was what he was famous for, and that's why people loved it, and that's why it was an immediate hit. I do think we lose that, because obviously there's some easy things that could have been done and changed here.
Yeah.
Because they've cut out so much of the background from everyone.
Well, and on top of that, what happens to the other convicts? Like, as far as we're aware, and as far as the documents go, Javert is the only person who has a letter stating that Monsieur Lemire is not 24601, but now he believes he's 24601. What actually happens to the other convict? They
will not say, because this movie is lacking in detail.
Yeah, exactly. Because immediately we go to Fantine dying and having hallucinations of Cosette.
Yeah. You know, like one does on their deathbed.
Yeah.
I assume. I don't know.
Which now he's redeeming himself by failing to take care of her, so now he's gonna take care of the daughter, even though, you know, good on you, but fuck the other workers that you were so worried about 10 seconds ago.
Again, this movie doesn't explain jack shit, which is, again, where, like, some very small details added in could fix a lot of these plot holes.
Yeah.
That just, like, the musical in general doesn't have to worry about, because it's a musical. And, like, you don't need any of that. You're there for the music and the overall story. This is a movie. We have time and we have effort. We can add the details.
Yeah.
Not everything needs to be brown, muddy, and dirty.
An old PS3 game. This aesthetic.
Honestly, PS2 is about the graphic level that this movie goes for.
No, we went from, like, PS2 had a lot of vibrant colors to PS3 being a lot of, like, the dull, muddy...
I agree, but just the amount of, like, lack of distance that the camera takes, like, there's no distance at all.
Silent Hill fog.
Yes. Silent Hill fog is a great way to explain the setting for this movie, but with Monty Python mud. It's everywhere, and everyone is covered in it. Except for the rich people, because obviously they don't have mud on them.
True. But Fantine is happy in death knowing that Cosette is going to be taken care of, which also sets up the idea for the ghost later on, which, speaking of body transformations, Hathaway lost 15 pounds for this scene.
She lost 25 pounds for this scene.
God damn.
Yeah, which is incredibly, that's a lot, especially since she did not have a giant lead to know that she was going to get this. I think she had about a year to do it. And one of the ways she did it was the same, like, she saw Hugh Jackman lose a bunch of weight because he knew he was being cast, like, right off the bat. He was one of the first ones to get his role. She got hers much later. They went through a handful of other actresses that they thought maybe would be a good fit before they finally landed on her. So to get to her weight, she saw that Hugh Jackman lost a bunch of weight and came to him and was like, how'd you do it, man? And he's like, don't freaking eat for like 2 days and go on a lot of runs. And so that's what she did. And both of them went out and had like interviews where they were like, this is how we lost the weight. I don't recommend it.
No.
And everyone went, yeah, no fucking shit.
Yeah. But little as she did, she's still warm, and Javert is there to finish his job, which I will say,
this is a good way to make him scummy.
Yeah, but I do like that they have the dueling song. I think works very well. This is where Crow's singing does get a bit better.
I agree, and I wish he had had more time to warm up and maybe not have started on such a strong song.
Yes, but also I do like what Hooper did with the song change that he brings up. Is that there's a line in the musical that he felt got overlooked that reveals Javert's history, that he was one of the street urchin. He was born into a work camp. Like, he was scum like them at one point, but he's risen above his status. He knows he's never going to be upper crust, but at least he'll be better than living in the dirt.
He's not covered in filth, is he?
Beautiful. I think it should be, "It ain't covered in filth, easy."
Yeah, that's actually how they say it in the movie, I think. There are little lines like that sprinkled throughout that, like, again, the people who are, like, really into this movie version of the musical, like, they cling to those, and they point to those as, like, evidence of there being more than the musical version. And while I think the director is aware of them, and the writing team was definitely aware of them, I don't think they were emphasized enough to really balance out.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because almost after he reveals that, Valjean escapes again. Like,
the man is slippery.
Javert's not very good at his job, at least with like one person.
No, he's really not good at his job because not only does he keep letting this man fucking escape, he's also been the mayor of his own town for how long now? 8 years?
Well, to be fair, if you're overseeing the work camps and now this is your new position, you're not chasing him down.
I guess, but also, like, he looked at this man and went, do I know you? Watched him lift a log and went, wait a minute! You
lifted that flag once.
I know only one man can lift in this town.
Do you even lift, bro?
Not like that man.
His name shouldn't be Jean Valjean, it should be Swole Valjean.
If only.
That was a bad joke. But now we're off to some inn where we're starting to get Cosette dreaming. The music here makes me think a little bit of like Final Fantasy IX with like the pacing and like
the pacing. Like, I get why there's music here. Again, the musical version, which is what we were going from, is very music dense.
It feels very storybooky is what her singing feels like.
I agree, and part of that is just young vocals. Like, this is a challenging role to do, and I do think she did a good job with the singing of this. But it is a very difficult role to do. Yeah. And especially because they were doing the live singing again, like, it, depending on how you're looking at it, you're either very impressed that she's able to do it, or you wish we had had more time to practice.
Yeah. And even then, like, some of her whispering singing works quite well. It reminds me a bit of Aisling from Secret of Kells.
I agree, and I think that's where a lot of people were most impressed with her, was this is not only a difficult part, but she's doing it at a difficult pitch, and difficult, like, she's singing these very high notes very quietly. But once you know how much time she had to practice, it does become clear, like, where we could have possibly, like, improved this, especially because this isn't a young musical. Again, this is a musical that has been done a billion times by a lot of very talented people.
By this point, 30-some years.
Yeah.
Ish.
So there was a lot to live up for musically.
Yeah. But the scene is good too in the fact that it's showing the difference between her and Eponine, who is dotted on where Cosette's doll, if you can call it that, is really just some cleaning rag that she's
tied together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I do want to praise, like, this is one of the few instances where I do think the character design, for as little as there honestly was for this movie, I do think this part works. I do think that they spent most of their time and effort character thinking on Courgette, or however you say her name.
Cosette.
That's it. Mostly because, like, they knew they were going to use her on the front cover of literally everything. But I do think she works. She comes across as very, like, Cinderella-esque, even without having to know anything about her, even without having to really get into the later pieces that explain, like, what her living situation looks like. I wish we had done that with the rest of the cast and crew.
No.
Yeah, I know.
The wishing and getting are completely different things in this one.
I know, but I will say that this is by far the strongest, like, setting, casting, and, like, character development that they have, because, like, her clothing is on point. The doll rag is, like, one of the only props we have in this movie.
I think Fontine's still better.
I agree, Fontine's is also very good, but there's not a whole lot else to go on other than just the passion of the actress, which is very good. But, like...
It's very short-lived, yeah, I'll admit to that.
Yeah.
Well, this is pretty short-lived, too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because she's sent off, and we get our little song with the band of Soaks and Landlord, which I do think Borat is very good as the master.
I agree.
Unfortunately, I couldn't get past Borat, so, like, every time he was saying master of the house, I'm thinking, master of the house, keeper of the key, wee-woo-lee-loo.
Yeah, a lot of people have the same problem. Again, there's a lot of actors and actresses that aren't necessarily... Honestly, even some of the main ones, like Hugh Jackman, like, people had a really hard time seeing them as not whatever their most recent main role was. That's just how it is.
Well, I do like this scene, too, because everyone's a real dickhead. I mean,
yes.
Santa, cats, cripples, no one is safe from them.
Nope, they are all getting just... They're terrible, and I like that.
The landlady's a seductress. We get a bad Santa of one girl riding Santa.
Yeah, I do think that this is where... Several reviewers called this a comedy period piece, and I think this is where they're getting the comedy portion. And while I do think the comedy is funny, it is strange because, like, there's not a whole lot of comedy anywhere else. It's just kind of these characters who are, like, the random clowns.
No, exactly. And I think part of that is just due to because Hooper stated that Cohen and his writing partner scripted all the gags, and Father Christmas specifically was Cohen's idea.
And I mean, like, the gags are good, but they are very dense in this one scene, and I think this type of humor is funny. However, like, it's kind of weird that this is, like, the only real part of humor throughout the whole movie. Like,
yeah.
Everything else is very serious.
Unless you consider it a joke that Valjean can't, or Javert can't recognize Valjean.
I agree that is a joke. I don't think it was meant to be one, though.
Yeah, exactly. And even from here, like, we get this little bit, and then we go to Cosette, who's so alone, but Valjean is there to whisk her away to a new life, which...
It's very fairy godmother-y, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just... I get the sentimentality of this all.
Yes. Again.
But he abandoned all the other workers that he was trying to give a shit about before.
On top of that, according to the movie, they have never met before. This child does not know this man. Yeah. And he's just like, trust me, get in my van, I got candy. And she's like, wee!
Yeah, no, exactly.
She's lucky that this is the most righteous man on the planet.
Oh god, she's so lucky. Also, one little thing I picked up on the music here is you get a little bit of the motif from, like, Can You Hear the People Sing?
Yes, there is. The music is phenomenal. However, with that said, while they did rewrite some of the music, most of it was just edited down. They didn't really recompose anything. So, like, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail for the music portion for this movie because they didn't write any, really.
Except for a couple scenes they had to add.
They added some scenes, but they didn't really add any music. They reworked some music, but they really didn't rework a whole lot more than, like, some standard, like, take a clip here, put it over there.
Mm-hmm.
So, while the music is delightful, it is very good, the movie really can't take credit for it.
No. But he does meet the landlord and lady.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy that while they're being ever so selfish, because he has this status, they think they're going to take advantage of him, but little do they know that he knows all their tricks.
Of course, because he's a criminal, don't you know? He's stolen bread and some candlesticks, and now a child.
I'm sure he's learned a thing or two having to work in a hard labor camp.
Again, background details. Just anything. Just show me the inside of the man's house. Anything would help. Give him some outfits that would, describe to me how maybe he also is not living in a great life. How he too understands the plight of the simple man.
But he can't because he's Monsieur Lemieux.
I know, and also everyone in this movie is just covered in mud.
Yes.
There is no costume, there's only mud.
But I do also think it's funny that they fall on, like, the whole Christian, what a good Christian would do. We took care of her so long, she was sick all the time.
Again, like, the original writing does shine through occasionally in this movie, and I do like it when it does. I think it's the strongest parts.
Yeah. And immediately they think they messed up when Javert arrives, and they're like, oh shit, we should have charged him more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, finally, Valjean is happy and supposed and determined to shelter Cosette for life, but Javert is still on their ass. Somehow he's able to track them down relatively quickly.
For a man who can't recognize shit worth shit, he's a very good tracker, much like the Prince and Princess Bride.
Yeah. And they escape by jumping into a river. Like,
okay, this is the only part where I'm going to bring up the history of France.
Okay.
This river would have been the nastiest fucking thing on the planet.
Okay.
At the time period, this would have been a free trash and sewage transportation system for the city. Everything that was in the street goes into the river. This is not like, oh, it's a little brown because it's muddy. No, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
This is like swimming in the LA River. Don't do it. It's gross.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they do eventually show up at some convent or some...
Yeah, church place.
Yeah. And they're saved by a man who was who they saved from the cart earlier, get the good that you put out. He might have neglected Fantine, but
and
he
like
saved
all
this
those,
one man.
And all those other people who were counting on him paying their wages so they didn't, go to the homeless camps.
Yeah. Well, also the other part about this, too, is like, this is where the movie really starts heavily going from, like, talking to singing, and it just, the talking now feels odd because we've been singing pretty much the whole time, or even, like, speaking, like...
And I think part of the reason it feels weird is in the stage productions, when we do just the speaking, we have a rather strong music break, whereas in the movie, the music just kind of plays all the time. There's not a lot of actually quiet parts without it being, like, definitely silent. And so when we do get just dialogue, it sounds weird because there's still stuff happening in your head as far as music-wise. And also with a stage production, you have time to stand there, plant, and, like, proclaim out. And, like, it is a, like, set in a way that people are used to seeing and are expecting. However, with the movie, it just kind of comes off weird. Because, again, like you said, we had been sing-songing our way through the whole first part of this movie. We'd gotten used to it. Some people hated it. Some people loved it. And now we're starting to switch to, like, proper singing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, breaking, and then talking, and then singing again.
Yeah.
And it does come off really strangely, but also, like, it comes off very musical styling. So some people think that this half of the movie is better, like, musically, whereas some people really like the first half. I just wish they had picked one.
Yeah. No, it's very hit and miss throughout, because... Even after all this, now we're back to Javert, who is now a man on the edge, physically and metaphorically.
He's going crazy looking for this old man who's very distinct looking and not hard to find at all.
Yeah, and it's a nice little bit where he's showing that he grew up in the world, but he's blinded by status. The singing has gotten a little bit better. Not great, but better for this part.
And I think part of the reason why it sounds fine is because he's not being directly compared to someone else's singing. Because his singing is, again, it's fine. Everyone else in this movie, though, is slightly better. And I say slightly because we now have heard all of these actors and actresses sing, like, to daytimes. We've all heard them sing in pieces much better than they did when they did this movie. So, like, they were okay then. They're much better now. And unfortunately, he was starting, like, well below.
Yeah.
So, like, no one's singing was great. Everyone's acting was good, but no one's singing was great. And his was just real bad.
Yeah. But despite that, it is a nice moment. It's very much... It mimics Valjean's part where he's walking back and forth across the hallway.
Yes.
But
like, inner turmoil.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I do think it's nice that, like, we do have some, like, character understanding happening. Not a lot, and no backstory. Fuck the backstory for anybody. But we do get some, like, understanding of turmoil, and I do like that for all of the characters, because, like, the whole point of it is, like, where do you draw the line between doing what is right for righteousness' sake and for, like, guiltiness' sake, and where do you, like, go off and try and carve your own path to better yourself? And the movie does a very heavy-handed interpretation of, like, one is clearly, like, the moral high ground than the other.
Yeah.
But I do think that there was room and, like, an attempt put into having, like, some exploration into, like, no, neither is good. Neither is, like, a healthful way of living.
Yeah, it's never good to be too far in one extreme or the other.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which, cool little bit about this scene, they scanned all of Notre Dame to do this scene because of budgets as well as logistics.
I can understand how getting Notre Dame to yourself to film in might be challenging.
Not necessarily Notre Dame, but to be on the top of a building of Paris with an actor on the edge of a building.
Yeah, it's maybe not a great, like, gonna be just green-thumbed right away.
Yeah, exactly.
And now we have a scan of the building because, as we learned, scanning your important buildings is really important because they probably are gonna burn down.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's okay because it happened to one of the most scanned buildings of all time.
Good. But now we have a time jump to 9 years of 1832, where we've got another look down.
Yeah.
The poor are no longer submissive like the earlier tunnel. I personally find Gavroche absolutely obnoxious.
I think he's meant to be annoying, though. I think he's meant to be annoying in kind of a haha that's a little funny way. Where, like, if one of your thoughts of a joke is to just annoy the crap out of another person, you will find this character entertaining.
Yeah, I guess.
If, spending your entire time annoying someone else does not sound like the peak of comedy to you, this character's just gonna be, like, the worst.
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. No, I get it. He's supposed to be like the lowest of the low. The children are always affected the most. Yeah,
I mean, but it is very much just how do you get a snot-nosed kid to, like, come across in a musical/movie scene without him just becoming Oliver?
Yeah. We got the whole, like, start of the revolution. Vive la Marquis.
Sure. Why not? Let's now have a revolution.
Yeah, we see, like, the little bit of falling down of status of some of the characters. That things, while they were going well for the landlord earlier, they're not going so well for him now.
Okay, this is, again, one of my complaints on this movie. The movie does, like, state it. Like, it does a good job of being like, look how even the middle class, or the supposed interpretation of the middle class, because there wasn't really one, is being hurt by everything. Like, everyone should unite together to, like, reform and revive. The characters that they are showing us as being, like, the ones who had money and power were so annoying and so poorly, like, they were just there for jokes and just there for giggles and to be, like, quote-unquote, a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, I don't give a shit that they're having a hard time. And in fact, I know while the movie directly tells me, like, gosh darn it, aren't we having such a hard time? I don't care. And you don't look like you're having that hard of a time, not gonna lie.
No.
And while I understand that, like, showing literally anything else would be breaking from the musical version of, like, what this was sourced on. The book goes so far out of its way to explain the entirety of everything possible in the world. It would have been nice if we had, like, briefly looked around the city and, like, looked at anything other than the muddy street.
Yeah.
That way I could have, like, seen how how rich are other people? Because that would have been a great, like, understanding point for most. Would have helped bridge the gap.
Mm-hmm.
Alas, though, again, there is no scene, only mud.
Nope. Exactly. And all we really see is that Eponine's in love, or Eponine's now grown up.
Yay.
Borat's back.
Yeah, no. I hate that, like, this movie, like, there's so many good actors and actresses that nowadays we know, like, after they have gotten away from their, like, very typecast roles, we know what they're capable of. We know what they sound like when they've had time and practice for sing and dance, or just acting in general when they're not, like, Borat. This movie didn't have the room. This helped create the room, but it didn't have the room, so I agree. There's, like, several characters in here who I'm like, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Well, and, I mean, he's a street scammer, so someone's else a street scammer. Everyone just happens to be in Paris now.
Like one does, really.
Yeah.
During a revolution, no one moves to the country. Everyone moves to the city to be part of the revolution.
Well, yeah, kind of. But even Valjean's ways have not changed. He's going to help the mother in need, which...
Jean Valjean, please. Please, retire.
Which
Go to the country.
I can see where there's a little bit more comedy in this scene, too, where...
There's an attempt at comedy. I think the comedy is only comedy if you are the right type of person for the comedy.
It's very dumb comedy, where...
Yes.
Borat doesn't recognize him until his wife does.
Again, I could be so down for the concept that Jean Valjean is a fucking shapeshifter. And I love Hugh Jackman. I think while he is not maybe the top best, like, actor who could have been, at the time, cast for this role, I do think modern day Hugh Jackman, perfect casting choice. This is earlier Hugh Jackman. We hadn't fully gotten into our singing chops just yet. However, Hugh Jackman always looks like Hugh Jackman no matter what you fucking do.
Yeah.
I don't know. Stick a prosthetic on the man.
Well, yeah, because Javert doesn't recognize him.
He looks exactly the same!
Exactly. Again, here we see Sass talks because he's dressed a bit nicer.
But again, he looks exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And normally, I am a sucker for period pieces because of the costuming. Even when they are, like, done in a, like, costumey sort of way, I can get behind it because they're usually, like, really selling something about the character.
Mm-hmm.
There is no costumes for this movie. That's very disappointing because this is, like, the perfect opportunity. We could have had a very clear hierarchical standing with, like, who had what sort of colors on, what sort of, like, buttons, what sort of cut and fashion, how modern is it? Instead, we get layers of dirt.
Lucky for you, our next movie's gonna have that.
I'm so looking forward to it because, again, I love this movie. I think this movie's great. However, this is a terrible example of a period piece.
No, exactly. But back to characters. Poor Eponine. She's sent to go find out where someone lives.
Like you do.
Where Cosette lives because her revolutionary love interest is so into her.
Again, there is like a cute young love triangle thing that goes on here.
Mm-hmm.
It is very brief. And again, there's not a lot of background given to anyone in any form. There's not props added to anyone. There's not really even very good costuming added to
Excuse
anyone.
me, Newt Scamander has a ring to show that he was once part of the upper crust, but he's put it away, but he still carries it on him.
His character's one of the ones that has a slightly better costume. It's not great, though, because this whole movie is filmed in a very select palette.
Yeah.
The movie's not just, like, not only is this movie dark all the time, even during the day, it's almost Sweeney Todd black and white-esque, where, like, yes, there are colors, but it's almost impossible to remember any of them that aren't directly from the French flag.
Yeah, I can see that now.
And while I understand why we picked those to, like, stand out and add to the whole, like, passion of the revolution that's supposed to be happening, again, the revolution's a tiny little portion of this movie that honestly doesn't do anything for the plot. It just, like, kills some people, and, like, whoa, so sad. But, like, everyone was gonna die anyway. Everyone has the plague of some kind. So, like, I get why we went with French Revolution and French flag colors for everyone. However, it doesn't really add anything to characters. And it'd be really nice to see more of a transition, because his character kind of has nice clothes. They are not, like, well, but they don't translate well because no one else has nice clothes.
Yeah, we really don't see the upper crust in this movie.
No, but we're supposed to. We're supposed to have seen several examples of, like, on the verge of upper crust.
Valjean is, like, the only one, really.
You could argue that, like, a lot of the people who, like, are, at least adults in this movie, at some point are trying to get close to upper crust. With, of course, the exception of Anne Hathaway's character, who is just bottom tier all the time because she's dead.
Yeah.
And one of the first things, and part of, like, the history of this time period, that people were attempting very hard to do was with clothing and fabric. That was how, like, you were trying to show that, like, I am not a peasant. Like, that is how they were trying to create a middle class, was by, like, being able to create, buy, and wear whatever the rich people were wearing.
Yeah.
Granted, to a different extent, it was not as, like, full-fleshed and, like, fulled out as, like, we see much later on in history.
Or earlier, where, like, the Romans, only certain people were allowed by law to wear certain articles.
French and English did that too.
Oh.
A lot of it was color, a lot of it was, like, specific cuts and fabrics, and another way they did it was, like, there was no ready-to-go fashion, so, like, it's very expensive to have the newest thing constantly. A lot of these people, though, have gotten into money. We know that because they've picked stupid fucking pieces of costuming to wear. But while I could have accepted one or two of those characters being bad at picking fashion and clothing as a statement of how little they know and how little they, like, fit into the upper crust and how badly they stand out, they just come across as clown characters because nobody else is bothering to wear anything other than a standard button-down shirt.
Very nice.
Except for Newt Scamander, who, like, kind of sort of wears something nice, but instead of coming across as, like, he used to be of money and of wealth, and now he wants to be, well, we'll talk about later, he is now part of the standard human populace of Paris. It doesn't really come across that way because, again, no one else in this movie is using their costume to, like, depict who they are, or their status, or where they come from, or their goals and aspirations. He's the only one who kind of sort of does it, and instead of coming across that way, it just comes across as he's the hot one.
Okay, I can see it.
Because he's the only one who wears anything that doesn't look like it's got pee on it.
But another little note to this movie is all the buildings are crooked, which they had the hardest time getting the builders not to build things plumb.
That's adorable, because I work in big box stores, and every time I go scope those suckers, they're crooked.
Yeah. My bathroom's got a crooked wall.
I need to start hiring set designers, apparently.
But now we get a meeting of the revolution, which is overshadowed by love.
Yeah, I get why. And the musical, I think, does a little bit stronger point of it, just because, like, you're dealing with a smaller select scene. Like, there's less on stage to look at, there's not crooked buildings to worry about, there's not camera angles, there's not shaky camera that's trying to, like, run with the characters, which, depending on who you are, a little distracting, not gonna lie. I think the, like, overlap between love will continue and, like, young love will always find a way, and, like, war and revolution, those parallels, I think come across better on the stage than they do in the movie, because we have more to look at, which I know I just bitched about how we don't have enough to look at, but now that we have something to look at, we have more plot to worry about, and the two things don't go together. The only reason that, like, it's even remotely interesting, and it's something that they struggled with, was part of the reason why the original book even brings up this is because this was a huge portion of, like, street planning in Paris was because of the riots. And if you're an architect, or we're reading the original book where he spends an entire fucking chapter talking about this crap, you wouldn't know that because the movie doesn't explain it. Because, yes, the buildings are crooked. However, it just comes across as Tim Burton-esque.
Yeah. No.
As opposed to, like, wow, city planning can really impact war.
Actually, it technically can, but...
In this instance, it did, and it, like, revolutionized how we see that city nowadays.
That's why I have the French boulevards.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't really explain that, so unless you already know, which some do, and some didn't care that it wasn't included, I don't think it really, like, helped. Again, there's just a lot missing here.
Yeah. Well, back to Les Mis. I think the song is a bit weird in my opinion at times because
A bit.
specifically the line "Red, the blood of angry men." It's like it sounds good.
It does. It sounds good.
But do you not realize that all human blood is red?
I mean, maybe they're taking that bad public school education. I think some blood's blue.
Our Newt Scamander is educated, remember?
That's true. He's a professor.
But this is also a real, like, they're real bros before hoes.
Oh, a hardcore bros before hoes.
Yeah.
Which I kind of dig because, again, they're on the screen for barely any time at all.
Oh, yeah. And it's also just a way to show that regardless of whatever revolution it is, it's a lot of time the educated and the rich trying to lead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely some good parts. I think a lot of it, though, does get muddied by, like, how shaky the camera work is. I know they were trying to go for a sense of urgency and panic and, like, young adrenaline where, like, you jump before you think sort of concept.
Yes.
And I do think the panic comes across well. But it does make it really hard to, like, follow who's going where. It does feel like we're just kind of, like, running through random buildings. Which, I mean, kind of are, but, like, it doesn't feel cohesive enough that unless you watch this a couple of times, you kind of get lost on what's going on and who's talking to where. And you do very quickly have to think to yourself, like, wait a minute, weren't we just talking about how you loved each other a lot?
Yeah.
Where'd that go?
Exactly. Quickly we find that Lamarck is dead.
Yes.
And he was the people's man, so it's now time for Vive la Revolution.
Which I love. And I think for a lot of people, this is in their head what they think of when they hear French Revolution. This ending scene with the fighting, with the death, and then the final, like, flag waving. But remember, this isn't really the whole French Revolution. This is like a 2-day scrimmage.
Yeah, it's called the a June Rebellion. It's not even called a revolution.
No, it like happens so fast that a lot of the times, like, when you're learning about the revolution, they, like, don't even mention this one.
No.
They're like, it is in there somewhere.
Yeah, it was a key factor in it because they learned the tactics of how things were done during this rebellion.
Yeah.
And reutilized or fixed what they did wrong for the next one.
Yes. It is just very funny, though, that, like, this movie, and, like, the musical definitely, but this movie had such an impact visually at the end that, like, to this day, this is what people, like, imagine when they think French Revolution is this ending scene.
Exactly. And before we get to the ending scene, Cosette, we have a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about her.
Cosette wants the outside world because she met a boy for a second.
You know, part of your world? Nonsense. Whatever.
Yeah. To be fair, she is a very lonely child, which...
She is an incredibly lonely child.
Valjean, at the same time, is a real twit because he's like, maybe I should. Why is she so sad? It's like, you have ostracized her from the world. Like, you have kept her away.
Yeah. And again, this is one of those things, like, depending on which version you watch, they do a much better job of explaining. If you watch this movie a whole bunch, or you spend, like we do, an ungarbled amount of time just looking into every piece of dialogue possible, and then the history and thought process behind it, it makes sense. I don't think most people watching this, though, thought like that. I think they watched it and went, wow, what a spoiled 16-year-old child.
Yeah. No. But this song does have a lot of good overlapping. Part of it
sounds great.
Some of it reminds me a bit of, like, Feeling This by Blink-182.
I can see what you mean.
Yeah.
I can see what you mean. Yeah.
But the dipshits are here, the ex-landlord, they're all gonna take some money, or try and take money from Valjean.
You know, does he look like a man rolling in dough?
No.
No.
If
anyone was paying attention, you know that all of his money is kept very safe on the street urchins.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly.
Like, the man didn't keep a single penny for himself.
No, he's kept enough. Remember, they're planning their escape to their other apartment.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
He does have some money. But again, the movie spends so much time making this man into, like, the most saintly saint to ever walk French soil.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, it's kind of hard to imagine this being, like, a useful raid.
Yeah. Also, I really don't like the scream in this scene. It's so bad and, like, poorly theatrical.
It's not great. I've heard worse.
Same, I've heard worse too.
I've heard worse every time I turn on Star Wars.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Also, why does he think it's Javert?
I don't know. Again, background information would be nice in the form of, like, a brief scene where we would see correspondence on his desk.
Yeah, or sees Javert somewhere outside of his apartment of, like, stalking the streets for him.
Or, you know, like a quick, brief, like, contemplation scene where he's, you know, constantly worried about Courgette being found out by the one man who's ever noticed him more than once.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so we get a Singing in the Rain song, which there's so many side characters. Like, you kind of lose track of who is the main character. Is it supposed to be Valjean? Is it supposed to be Javert? Or is it supposed to be Cosette at this point now?
And I agree, but I also kind of like this, because this kind of, to me, feels more like how I wish the overarching story, which, like, this isn't a bad way to tell the story. I do think it works movie-wise. However, I do think that it's very easy for the majority of this movie to easily point to Jean Valjean saying he is the main character, which isn't true. This is supposed to be a story about all three simultaneously.
Okay.
And I do think that this part does that. I do think this part kind of is, while kind of wrapping up all three of their stories and their overlappingness, I do wish that there had been more of this, but I also understand why the movie chose not to.
Yeah. I mean, we're already at, like, almost 2 hours into this movie.
It's so long. It's so long.
And also, like,
the musical's long too, though. There was no getting around this.
Yeah. I mean, Scamander also, like, despite him putting bros before hoes a scene earlier, is now out trying to find Cosette.
Okay, I agree. It is bros before hoes, but also hoes.
Yeah.
Like, he's a young man. He's got his priorities.
Kind of.
He thinks he's in love, and when you're young and you think you're in love, that's all that matters.
And then immediately after this, he just decides to join the rebellion. Like, it's not...
Yes, and I agree. Like, he's very back and forthy. I do kind of like it, though, because it kind of shows to me, like, young passion and how quickly that, like, intensity can shift focus.
Yeah.
And I do like that, and I do think that that, like, works for the overarching story that they're trying to tell. But I agree, like, again, there's some detail, there's some, like, choice in how things were edited and put together. Like, it does feel floppy.
Exactly. And on top of that, somehow Javert Javert and everyone knows there's gonna be a revolution.
Okay. I agree. In the movie, it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
However, like, everyone did know in, like, real history. Like, it was very well proclaimed, like, hey, if y'all don't stop your shit, we're going to, like, absolutely just light this shit on fire. I'm gonna burn this house to the ground. And they're like, no, you won't. And they're like, well, I'm doing it now. I'm burning the house to the ground as we speak.
Yeah.
So, like, in real history, I get it. But again, this movie kind of expects you to have done all of your homework if you want to, like, fully, like, piece together what's happening.
Yes and no, because Hooper also brought up that, like...
I know what he thought.
Yeah, he's like, oh, you don't have to know, like, or he's like, most people don't even know who Le Marquis is.
And I agree. Most people don't, which is why you should have explained it better.
Well, yeah, because we immediately go to his funeral march, and now it's time for rebellion.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I don't get, like, Javert, he's in common clothes trying to infiltrate. It's like, dude, you're an asshole to you were an asshole in the last town. I'm pretty sure you're an asshole in this area.
Probably.
Because it's the same area you were patrolling before, so people know your face.
And also, unlike you, people remember who other people are. You're the only one who, like me, can't recognize anyone else.
Yeah, but this scene was also added because the movie allowed the opportunity to make it.
And I agree, like, there is room for explanation, because I think the director and the writers are right. Most people who were watching this, like, even those who liked the original musical quite a lot, do not know the extensive ins and outs of French, like, court and, revolution and culture at the time. Which is why the book spent half of its fucking words on explaining everything to you.
Yeah.
Even things that you didn't think you needed to know, like the sewer system. The movie doesn't bother, though. It just is like, yes, we understand you don't know. But he's dead now, don't worry about it.
I mean, I can understand from a book standpoint, especially for the time, and, like, being a soldier in the Civil War, being like, well, goddamn, these French people have sewers and shit. We just got Mama's outhouse.
I love that you assume that that's what the Civil War people sound like.
I know it's not.
No, that's canon now. We're gonna rework all of the Patriot to be that accent.
Unfortunately, I do have to watch Gettysburg at some point because Sugi made me. She's gonna make me watch it.
Yeah, I'm gonna find a way to mod it so that that's the accent for everyone. But yes, like, the book does make sense. I agree. Like, the way he wrote, the way he explained stuff, people liked it. That's why it was an immediate success. It made things very accessible, and also, like, you felt like you comprehended a much deeper, like, problem and concept than you probably would have if it was written without all that extra fluff.
Yeah.
I agree. However, my complaint is we have a very fucking long movie that's based off of a very fucking long musical.
Yeah.
And instead of cutting songs, which we could have done, to replace songs with explanation and scenes about what is happening in the world and why we freaking care.
Or the show don't tell kind of aspect.
Yeah, literally anything. Instead of doing any of that, we keep all of the songs, except 2, because those don't count. We cut down some stuff by, like, a little bit. It's still crazy long, and now no one knows what's going on.
Yeah. And we get our song of Do You Hear the People Sing, the big song of the movie. And
while I will, to my dying breath, say that the entire Les Mis pacing is a little silly, including the book, this song is so good.
It is. But, I mean, it's quickly overshadowed because it's sparked by the killing of an innocent woman, or the rebellion is.
Yeah.
And they get that shit up so fast.
I will say that I do think that the editing here is probably the best.
Mm-hmm.
Because once we get done with the very musical-esque waving of the flags, we cut to very panicked cutting and camera angles, and this is where I think how the rest earlier was, like, chaotic and it's hard to follow, but it didn't need to be. This, it works. This is, I think, probably the best, like, directing for the movie.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good part, too. I mean, there was some placing at the end where they put the coffins up front to precurse what was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down for a little bit of symbolism.
Yeah, but kind of abandoned it for, like, a good chunk of the movie up until now.
Yeah, but also, like, you know, there's not a whole lot of consistency already, so I'll take what I can get.
Exactly. And, like, that night, Javert is there with intel, but, I mean, of course he's recognized by the kid. Like,
and also, Javert's intel is terrible. We've already established this. He is garbage at his job.
Yeah.
He's the worst. Why is he still here?
Ass kisser, I guess, or just is the only one alive?
He's one of the only characters left who's not on their deathbed or off being in love.
Yeah.
Like, explain, movie. Tell me why I care about this man.
Yeah, and also, like, I don't give a shit about Loverboy because he gets a message from Cosette, and now he sends Gavroche off to deliver messages again, and we're back to the talking, to singing, back to talking, back to singing.
I agree. It is very whiplashy. I do think that, like, nowadays, I agree. Loverboy's little bit here isn't super well put together. It doesn't feel as passionate as I think it could have come across as. I think a lot of musicals manage to make it where, like, you have a lot more time seeing the person on stage and a lot of that more back and forth.
Yeah.
Movie cuts all that out because we're too busy watching the runners go back and forth to do stuff.
Yeah, and we're already back and forth on all the characters too, because Valjean is now the dutiful dad, and he wants to make his daughter happy.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Like, not gonna lie, by this point, we've looked at that man for so long, I've stopped caring.
Yeah, which now puts him against Javert, and also he saves the rebels from snipers on the roof, and now
I love old-timey sniper.
Yeah.
Because it feels so less dangerous than modern-day sniper. That, like, I get it, you're in danger, but you're not in that much danger, are you?
They kind of are.
A little bit, but also, like, I don't know, duck, dodge, and weave, he can't hit you.
I mean, they've built up a barricade around, like, a corner street in Paris.
Yeah, it's like blocking one road.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's time to try and take care of Javert, which I do like kind of where they put his status, where he says, you can kill me with a knife because that's what your kind would do. Once a thief, always a thief.
I agree. And I think it would have been more impactful if we had had more time to sympathize with the character. We kind of sort of got it when he was talking about his background before and, like, his moral high ground that he thinks he's put himself on.
Yeah.
However, like, we didn't get a ton of that. We mostly just got him being an absolute dick and bad at faces. And so, like, when he throws these lines out, it doesn't come across as him talking about himself and how he's always been the street urchin who's still gonna stab people and be a backstabber. It comes across as, like, well, your kind isn't as good as my kind.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't give a shit anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. He steals his opportunity for revenge, which is great.
Yes.
But now it's immediately ignored because we cut time for the bros drinking and waiting. Which,
like you do.
Yeah, I mean, it just...
They didn't have phones back then. They didn't have TikTok to scroll through. They're going to just sit there and drink.
Yeah, and it's just a scene to explain why Valjean is now all for it. Is because his daughter wants the good deed.
Look, I think that this is one of my favorite portrayals of Jean Valjean. However, I see this man too much.
Yeah.
And so I no longer care because I've been watching this movie forever. And at this point, even in theaters, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
My back hurts. My bladder hurts. I am hungry. I would like to leave. Please stop holding me hostage, movie.
Yeah. No, exactly. Because right from here we learn that the last barricade's been abandoned by the people, and this is like the last stand, which... Yeah. They're geared into fighting because Gavroche is being a dickhead and gets shot, which Gavroche, I think part of the reason I don't like Gavroche is because he seems like such a child that he's just parroting what the cool kids around him have been saying.
I agree.
And he dies because of it. Like, he doesn't understand what's going on, but he's there for the ride.
Yes. I do think that his character makes more sense, again, with a slight bit of context background. Because he feels like a random street urchin child. Mm-hmm. He's not. He's not a random street urchin child.
No.
He has a family. They're well explained. However, I'm not going, like, it doesn't matter in the movie because they don't explain anything. Yeah. So they explain the importance of this child and his family connections and why you care about him at all and how he's tied to the rest of the story.
Because isn't, like, the Heath Ledger looking dude his brother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
It's there's so many little, like, connections that they try and put in front of you that don't lead anywhere.
And, like, I get it. Like, I do think that there's a lot of things this movie does do well. I do think that there's a lot of things that I enjoy. I don't know if it's necessarily good or bad, but, like, I enjoy from this movie version of the musical. And I also think that the musical doesn't necessarily do a super good job most of the time. There's exceptions in all musicals because there's a billion different castings and versions of it, right? But it is one of those things where there is so much going on that unless you spend an exorbitant amount of time immersing yourself in the original source material, that you won't ever catch. And the movie would have been a great way to introduce people who liked the musical, like me, into that without having to ask them to read the book.
Oh.
Because the book is hard to get through, I'm not gonna lie.
I don't doubt it.
It's not necessarily impossible. It's no Moby Dick. I've read that one too, and that one's awful. Don't bother. Good God. The man's on such a tangent. There's like hardly any whale in that book. But it's also not an easy book to get through, especially if you're really wanting to like get into it. There's a lot of extra bits that like even though the author explains, you still have to do a bunch of side research to really go through.
It's like trying to read Lord of the Rings sometimes.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, because like you could just read Lord of the Rings and you'd still be like way ahead everyone else when you're watching the movies, right? But where Lord of the Rings took the background time to spend time on some establishing shots and really spending a lot of effort on
building the world.
And also spending a lot of effort on creating the different looks for all of the characters, so that way, from a distance, you could tell who was who and what was happening. That would have been great to see in this movie.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be a 3-part movie. It just needs some cohesiveness.
No, exactly. Because immediately after this, it's canon time. There's chaos. There's no refuge. Eponine dies.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, it's just a quick moment where, and that's one of the songs he cut where he's like, I love this song, but we had to cut it. And it's just like...
Yeah, okay, I get it. I also love all of the music from this musical. We should have cut more, though.
No.
There was more we could have gotten rid of song-wise, or at least replaced the actual singing part with just an orchestra bit.
So a regular-ass dialogue.
So that we could understand what was going on.
Yeah, because immediately as things go south, Valjean grabs Scamander, and they go to the sewers, which...
Again, there's an entire portion of the book that explains the sewers in depth.
Yeah.
This movie doesn't. It just throws you Teenage Mutant Ninja style into the sewers.
Yeah, and why is Borat in the sewers? Like...
Okay, in the book it explains more on how old the Paris sewers are, how pieced together they are, how tall some of the sections are, how large, how they had been used in the past, and why this is a valued option and a historical importance to the city itself.
Yeah.
The movie doesn't do any of that, though, does it?
No.
The movie's just like, bam, in the sewers, have fun, kids.
Well, yeah, because he's saved, and he gives up his... the ring's given up so that way they can... Escape.
And, you know.
But who happens to be there at the end of the sewer? Javert. Who is absolutely lost at this point.
I do like the implications that the movie implies that this man is, like, One Piece Zoro level bad at directions, and just happens to accidentally stumble upon them.
Or he's so focused that he doesn't care about anything else. Now it's all about finding Jean Valjean.
Yes, which is what it's supposed to be. But, like, it is implied, because we don't get any background information or even any, like, real dialogue, which... 50-50 on that. It just is implied that Jean Valjean is the luckiest goddamn man on the planet. With the exception of the one time. One time he got caught stealing bread, ruined his whole life. The rest of the time, nicest man on earth gives him things that he's trying to steal. He accidentally becomes mayor. He keeps his strength. He ends up with a daughter who absolutely loves and adores him.
Stepdaughter
/ stolen child.
Gifted child.
Like, the people love him. He accidentally doesn't die in an accidental Revolutionary War. Like...
Not Revolutionary War, a rebellion, thank
you
very much.
A rebellion scrimmage that happens to end in cannon fire. Like, that man's the luckiest man on Earth. And then there's the guy hunting him, who's real bad at his job.
Yeah, who lets him go? I mean, I get the point that he's supposed to be like, okay, I understand this man has to live for a little bit longer. But then he's, again, a man on edge and decides to just end it all.
I do like this scene, though. Okay, no, after he's let Jean Valjean go.
Yeah.
Once he is lamenting on his life and how shit he is at his job and how he has let this consume his ever soul, I think this is one of the more poetic and realistic interpretations of jumping off a bridge.
Yeah.
And I say that as a praise, not because of, like, the rest of the movie not being realistic or anything like that. I'm saying that in the way that a lot of musicals handle this is very, like, theatrical and poetic.
Yeah.
And this movie spends the rest of its time, with the exception of Anne Hathaway's character, being poetic and kind of glossing over. They're trying to show how gross and dirty and how horrible these people's lives are, but the only person so far who's really shown that has been the girl at the beginning who's already dead. this is the only other time I think in the movie where they actually managed to successfully capture that feeling of true defeat.
Mm-hmm.
Of absolutely, like, not being able to get out from just everyone around you, but also yourself.
Yeah, I can see it.
And, like, it's dependent on each character, and I know it's supposed to be balanced throughout the whole film, but we lose a lot of that because the only, like, depictor of the worst part of people's lives is that it's wet.
Yeah.
Whereas the other two characters, like, him and the original characters, those show a much more vivid and realistic and heart-wrenching interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this scene. I wish this level of intensity had carried around for the rest of the characters, because then I would have agreed with Jean Valjean's devotion to, like, good.
Yeah. I do think that some of, like, specifically the falling part is a little too stiff, in my opinion. It feels like they tossed a mannequin over.
He does, float like a butterfly.
It's not as bad as The Fugitive.
Oh god, nothing could be as bad as The Fugitive. That man was, like, taped to a 2x4. But, no, I agree. This is not, like, the best scene of all, like, falling off a bridge scenes.
Mm-hmm.
This, to me, though, is one of the only other scenes after the very beginning that shows, to some level of clarity, why this world is terrible and people would want to leave it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Because other than this, like, we've, had some young love that's like, I don't know, oh, we're a little bit poor, oh, boo-hoo, like, everyone's a little bit poor, babe. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like, it's not meant to be, though. It's not meant to be. It's supposed to be showing an extreme that they are all living in, and that fails, except for those 2 points.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah. The rest of it just comes off Tim Burton-esque.
And just kind of, well, you have to hit the 20,000 points that the musical had.
Yeah, and, like, again...
Granted, the musical also has an intermission. This movie does not.
I say, bring back intermissions! Please! Because then I think this movie would have been better. And we could have gone a little longer. An extra 30 minutes could have gone a long way here.
Exactly. Because immediately from this, we move on to the ones who survived and the women cleaning the blood on the streets, which to the same tone as Lovely Ladies.
Yeah, I get it. Again, though, we've shifted from showing a real and terrible scene in somewhat of a poetic way to something that is akin to a joke at Edgar Allan Poe-esque.
Yeah.
It moves, it no longer feels like women cleaning up pieces of their loved ones off the street. It just feels like sad women mopping the street.
Or like they're just the regular street cleaners who are like, God damn, another rebellion.
Can we stop blowing up people? Yeah, like that's what it feels like, as opposed to people being forced to clean up other people off the ground.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want it to be overly gory, but again, like, we reached Tim Burton-esque, and we are so used to how Tim Burton's styling is that even when Tim Burton's styling did a horror film, it still felt, like, young and flirty. As opposed to, like, a terrible man who eats people.
Yeah, exactly. So, now we cut to the revolutionary dude who's...
Yeah, sure.
Gone back to his rich, snobby life after all his poor friends died.
I do like that it's like, well, that was fun, time to go back to mom and dad.
Yeah, his ideals mean jack shit, because he's like, alright, well, we're gonna live happily now, and then Valjean's like, alright, time to peace out.
Time to retire, thank God.
Just end it already, because even after this, we cut to their lives being even better, where we're introduced to Baron and Baroness du Tenarp.
We could have gotten rid of all of this.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't care what happens to the two young lovers. They could have very easily, Princess Brided, rode off into the sunset with, serious grave wounds, no money, and I would not have cared. In fact, I would have preferred it, even though I know, the story and the musical and the books do go on to explain everything. I feel like for the movie, it would have been better if we just didn't know what happened to them.
Yeah.
Just let them go.
Need to reiterate, these are the landlord and landlady, which I do have a thought.
Yeah. So,
Sweeney Todd takes place in 1846, which is only 23 years later.
That's true.
Could one of them have conceivably...
Potentially. I think the only reason they're tied together is kind of sort of plot, timeline.
Yeah.
And also, again, the styling of a lot of this movie doesn't read as terrible life. It reads as Sweeney Todd.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I hate about this scene, too, is it's like, he's so surprised that Valjean saved him. Like, no shit. You think you got out of the revolution or the rebellion by some miracle of God?
Yes.
Like...
And, okay, and I feel like the some miracle of God bit could have been a more valid point. Again, if we had cut some more of the, like, song singing bit that we didn't need, gotten rid of the two lovebirds, I don't care about them anymore. Like, have them have their quick little love and move on. We don't need to know. And then, like, have a quick little scene on him being, like, very religious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could have believed it. I could have gone with it. But, you know, again, I have spent almost 2.5 hours now looking at Hugh Jackman's face.
Yeah. No.
So I don't care anymore.
Yeah, and somehow they know where he's at, because now we cut to the church where we see the campus. And granted, they're told by the Baron and Baroness where he's at.
Of course.
Why do they know?
Yeah, well, I don't know. The man is friends with everybody. Why not?
Yeah. Also, they don't, like, we've had two time cuts before where we've cut years.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he so decrepit? It seems like he's been gone for, like, 2 days.
I like to think that he's been holding out for the very last second, but I agree. A time jump would have made more sense.
Yeah, no, if they gave us
or
a couple
even
years
like
later.
Like they did with some of the other characters, where very subtly they imply like the decline in health or the like foreshadowing of death. They don't really with him. They're just like, yeah, he's old. They die when they're old.
Yeah, which I think they did a good job with makeup. Hooper said that he believes that he caught something in the sewer or something. That's why he's declined.
Sure, but also, like, it's the old-timey times. I will happily accept miasma via the air.
He got cholera.
He breathed too hard in the smog-ridden air.
Yeah.
He ate a bad piece of meat. I don't know. People die all the time back then.
Yeah, because the two Cosette and Loverboy show up, and Fantine then shows up as a ghost to carry him off because he did good.
I don't care. I know this scene for a lot of people they really liked because it like shows the two of them finally reuniting, and a lot of people interpreted their characters as being like truly in love and being cut short of that love.
Yeah.
I didn't. I did not interpret it that way. I saw a man who wanted to do good because he felt guilty. I did not see true love.
Yeah, no, exactly. He doesn't really meet retribution because all he does is he raised Cosette,
yep,
saved the man that she wanted to screw, and then his actions led to the abandonment of an entire group of people, a group of factory workers. We don't know what happened to the criminal that he was supposedly like trying to save earlier.
True.
And also led to another man's suicide. Like,
yeah, no. But again, the way that this is all portrayed doesn't allow the audience to think about that. Because the only reason we've come to those conclusions is we have now studied this sucker.
Yeah.
Because of this podcast.
Yes.
I don't think anyone got to that. I think most people got to the very straightforward assumption of like, oh, he did good. And thus he gets, the good ending, which is the other good character. But again, like, the movie is not compelling here.
It feels like in a video game that has multiple endings where you're like, I have to do X, Y, or Z action to get good result.
But it's like a very specific action.
Yeah.
And it feels out of place for all of the other dialogue. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, because like there is room for all of this to have been explained. Because the story itself, like the background, the bones of the story do work and they explain it well. The movie does not bother to, like, let the audience in on that secret. It is fully just hoping that the emotions and the songs are going to reel you in. And it did, for several people. The other half of the population were not convinced. And I can see why. I agree, there's room for improvement here.
Yeah, because from here we go to time for the actual closing song of Can You Hear the People Sing on a Dream Barricade, which they wanted to make it the actual liberation of the French people in 1848. But they dropped it so that way they could reunite the characters, which honestly...
I don't care.
But here's the thing, is like, V for Vendetta basically did the exact same thing with dead characters. And it could have worked.
Yeah.
But it's just such a shitty way of doing it, of like, instead of like, oh, they actually freed the people, now they're on just some giant, like, 500-foot barricade singing.
I agree. From a story-wise, I fully agree with you. However, from a movie ending impact, it is hard to beat this. This ending looks and sticks with you.
I agree, but I also think part of my issue with it is it moves from being a movie to, oh, now the last song is a musical.
I agree. And this is where this movie, I think the real root of the problem happens.
Mm-hmm.
Is this movie wanted to be so badly a musical but it refused to give up the aspects of it that made it a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen much more recent versions of this do better. And part of that is, like, a lot of the cast has had time to come out and work on their singing and musical performances, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that is also choosing pacing and better timing with your songs and better editing with them. There's a lot going on in this.
Yeah.
It's a very long movie, but not a lot gets done because we spend a lot of time singing songs.
Yeah. No.
And
exactly.
I like the singing. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm one of the people who, when I watched this originally, I enjoyed the sing-songiness. I wasn't even terribly bothered by the flipping between sing-songing and full singing,
Mm-hmm.
and then going back again. Like, that didn't bother me as much as it did other people. What did bother me, though, was the lack of effort put into making this movie better than the musical version.
Yes, and I think that's exactly why it came with mixed reviews. I think part of the reason it works is because, like The Patriot, and we talked about previously, it's a movie with a historical background while not trying to be historic itself, like Braveheart.
I agree.
But again, like you said, it was trying to create its own identity while not really stepping too far away to make it more interesting than going to see the musical itself in theater.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people get lost, is like, if you hadn't seen the musical, I could see how you would be head over heels for this movie. However, if you've seen a good rendition of this musical, which even if you haven't seen the Broadway version, like, there are touring versions of this and there are local versions that are put on all the time. This is a very popular musical to do. Chances are you've seen this and you've seen it well done.
Well, and I think there's something important to say about, like, movie adaptations of musicals.
Yes.
And I think you brought up a good point of it tried to be the musical, but it tried to be something different. I think personally for me, for musicals to work as a movie is they have to make themselves distinct or provide something that going to a theater won't provide.
I agree.
Like,
and this got close.
Like Burst City. Could you see Burst City as a stage musical?
There's no plot, so no.
Well,
I could see it as a concert, though.
Exactly. But it's not a concert because it sets itself as a movie with a couple concert bits.
I agree. There's not enough, like, song part to it to make it feel like I have already seen it if I have seen this, like, concert version.
Exactly. Like, and maybe it's the reverse side of it for me too, or like when we did Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. I had never seen it before, so I didn't have something to compare it to, but at the same time, the movie did provide a backdrop that I don't think a stage could for the most part.
And I think that's something interesting to bring up, because Seven Brides for Seven Brothers is a terrible musical. However, the reason why I stand by my love of the movie, I don't think other people should join in on my love, it's a terrible one, but the reason I stand by it is because it is one that is not something that is easily seen on stage. It is not a popular one to do. It is not an easy one to do. The dancing is very difficult. The songs are it relies a lot on the movie aspects of it to make it good.
And it's also a large main cast. Like, we're talking Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Yeah.
In a way has 16 main cast characters
at minimum. And then you have all the townsfolk who are just as important to the story, and there's no way to whittle them down.
No.
Whereas with Les Mis, it is a stage piece first. Most people's experience with Les Mis is the musical version first, and I had hopes that, like Sweeney Todd, the setting, the acting, and the, like, costuming would have added another level.
Yeah.
Because I have seen the Broadway version, like I've seen the productions of the Broadway version of Sweeney Todd. Fantastic. A lot got cut for the movie. And eventually I do want to talk about it on the podcast. I think it's a great example of like a good adaptation. However, where I wanted to do Les Mis is because I don't think it, like, people love it. It's still good. But where it fails is the movie portion didn't add anything.
Yeah.
The only part that movie-wise enhanced it beyond what the musicals managed to do was the stellar acting by the overly committed cast members.
Yep.
Minus Crow, sorry.
I think so here's the thing. I think Crow's acting is good. I don't think his singing fits.
I think Crow's acting is good in the last part of the movie. I think there it redeems itself so entirely. However, I don't think he really had enough direction going on. Again, they did not have a lot of time to prep for this. Half of the cast didn't know they were going to be on this until like a few months before this started.
Yeah, I think they had like 3 readings before they went and started doing it.
And they had no musical rehearsals.
No. Which, speaking of the music, one thing Hooper said that this movie would change how musicals are made forever.
I disagree, and this is something else that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
He spent an absorbent amount of time pushing the fact of this live singing, which I agree, but for a different reason why. A lot of people thought that was the weakest point of the movie. And I agree, I think it's the weakest point, but not for the same reason that a lot of people thought. I think a lot of people were upset that it didn't sound like a musical-style singing, which I agree.
Yeah.
But the reason I don't think that it helped the movie is because it didn't let the movie. It really forced a lot of these actors and actresses into a very pigeonholed attempt at a musical, which a lot of them would have done better at this time in their acting careers doing this musical on stage, on Broadway.
Yeah.
With the exception of Crow, sorry. But because this is a musical first, they had 3 readings of the script. There's not a lot of script, guys. This is like mostly people singing.
Yeah.
And they had no rehearsals for singing. Everyone was just doing their own part because there's not a lot of dual singing going on. There's a handful of songs that really require like both singers to be together and working together. And they got lucky on those. Honestly, they did. The actors and actresses who had to sing at the same time to overlap were the best ones. And so I don't think that really helped. And also, he pushed this so hard as like world first.
Yeah.
This was going to be like groundbreaking. Like when he says this is going to change how stuff happened, in a lot of his interviews, he talks about how like, oh, from now on, all movies that are going to be doing musicals are going to be doing this live singing. It's going to work so much better. He did not invent this. This is how like 90% of musicals were done pre-doing like pre-recordings back like way back in the day. And even before that, like there were a lot, like almost an easy 10 very big, very popular movie musicals that had done it this way before. Granted, they weren't as big. They were not doing the Les Mis, you know, like they were doing smaller musical numbers. But he was not the first, and he's not even the like most recent addition. And this wasn't a compelling case.
Yeah, and I haven't done enough research on musical or modern musicals to make any determination, but not that I plan to at any time. I do agree that even in the commentary, he kept bringing it up over and over and over again of how revolutionary and how inspirational this would be.
And here's the thing that I think really hurts him, is he believed in this very hard. And like, I'm willing to let some factual inaccuracies slip if the gig is good. Like, I don't really care if something is the first to do something. Like, as long as you're doing it really well, I don't care. You could be the most impactful. We've seen that time and time again.
First City.
Yes, along with, like, several others where 3D, like, they weren't the first ones to do 3D. They were just the best. They weren't the, like, first to do CGI. They were just the best at the time. But the thing is, no one else on the crew seems to have held this belief as him. Everyone else loved this musical. They were willing to put in the work and the effort. They were excited to be breaking through into a musical setting. A lot of them really saw themselves as excelling on Broadway and wanting to bring Broadway into the movie world. That's where they really saw themselves. I would argue Hugh Jackman's the only one who's pursued that love. Good on him. The man wants to sing and dance. Let the man sing and dance.
Yeah.
but none of them saw the live singing as a benefit.
No.
Like, even Anne Hathaway, who overly committed for this role, like, she went beyond anyone else, and that's saying something. A lot of people went really beyond for this. Even she had criticisms on the fact that, like, she didn't have a lot of time to work on this role. She would have preferred to have time to work on the singing portion, been able to record it much more professionally, and yes, lip sync it on film so that she could have had time to act it. However, she blew it out of the water. Like, it turned out great. But one out of how many of the cast managed to blow it out of the water? That's not a great record.
No,
Not
exactly.
for how much budget this sucker had.
Oh, God. Yeah. So, Chris, what do you rate this on our good, bad, weird scale?
Much like Crispy Charlie. Yes. This is a good bad for me. I love this. I think it's a lot of fun. I have a great time watching it every time. I saw it in theaters with musical nerds who didn't like it, and I still enjoyed it. Despite their bitching. Love it, though. However, this isn't good. There's much better musical movie adaptations if you're looking for, like, a technical good.
Yeah.
The reason I put it in good and not just bad is because I have a great time watching it.
Yeah, well, and I'm in the same boat. I do consider this a good, bad movie. There are good elements to it.
Sure.
And even though I do have fond memories of working on the play or on the stage version,
I think the memories cloud a lot of people's judgments.
I don't think they cloud it for me, is because I'm so far removed from theater anymore.
I agree. I can understand that.
But I think it's bad because, as I said before, it doesn't really do anything that really sets it apart from what a stage could do. To take a look at The Greatest Showman.
Yes, a good example.
Would it do well on it? I think it would do fine on the stage, but I don't think you could do the same level of dramatics that it has.
I have seen adaptations of it on stage, most of which high school or kid productions, like just local theater groups doing a version of it. And while it's fun, it's one of those ones where I think it's the reverse of Les Mis, where my memory and fondness of the movie definitely cloud my judgment of the stage production.
Yeah.
Just like with Les Mis, my fondness for the stage production definitely, like, impacts my love of the movie.
Yeah. And going on to other musicals that I've brought up, I don't think it'd do this. It's not the same where, like, Tokyo Tribe I couldn't see as a musical done well, or Happiness of the Katakuris, or The Lure.
And, like, we've seen the extremes of, like, what a true bad adaptation looks like from the same director. Cats was a disaster.
Oh my fucking god! I finally had to watch that earlier this year, and
yeah, and I'm a diehard fan of the stage version of it, and I agree. The movie version's garbage. It's funny to laugh at, but, like, it doesn't hold any of the charm and appeal that the stage version has had for as long as it did. This one, I think. Everyone who worked on it loved the original musical, and you can tell, and that's why I enjoy it at all.
Yeah. So, Chris, would you recommend it now?
Yes, but not to everyone. If you are a musical theater person, I am not going to be the one to tell you you have to watch this, because I sat next to those suckers when they did watch this, and while I enjoyed listening to them bitch about it on their way out of the parking lot, like, we had a good time about it. We were, like, everyone enjoyed it. Everyone had a good time when we watched this. But there was a lot of criticisms coming and going. And I think that's not really the place of this. I think the place of this is an average person who just kind of generally enjoys a musical. If they're not a diehard fan, they're not seeing everything live and in person, they're not spending money to go to New York and see things in Broadway. If you're just a general enjoyment of musicals, this is a good time. This is a fun one to watch. It's very passionate. It's very emotional at times. This is not, though, for the higher level, like, super into it ones.
Yeah. I personally think it's fine. I don't think I would recommend it 100%, especially with what else is out there. I mean, it's... If this is your jam, sure, go ahead, give it a rewatch. But if you're just...
If you've never seen anything Les Mis, this is a good introduction.
Yeah.
I would, however, recommend you go see it on stage. I think you'll have a better time. But, like, if that's not an option for you, this is a good, like, intro to Les Mis if you've never seen it.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, now it's time for the 3 Degrees of Takashi Miike.
Alright, there's so many actors and writers and directors on this. I have little doubts that I'm gonna get any points here.
Well, with any movies with a lot of famous people, they end up being the hardest for me to connect because it either ties to Hostel, The Bird People of China, or The Last Life on Earth, I think is the other one that ties to. So for those who don't know, year 5 of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, we're doing a game. Here are the rules. 3 degrees to get to Takashi Miike.
Mhm.
Has to be a movie connection. Can't be the same connection, i.e. movie actor, writer, or director twice.
Mhm.
As well, I try and make the plot and the plot or any type of thematic ties between the two.
What happens if you win?
I got to do a full month of Miike movies.
And what happens if I win?
We could do a full month of Barbie.
Yeah, so far he has not lost, so
Nope.
you're looking good. Let's see if we can keep the ball rolling.
So this round goes to Sacha Baron Cohen, who was in Les Mis with James Green, who was in Empire of the Sun with Masato Ibu, who was in Agitator, directed by Miike, a film about a Yakuza captain whose loyalty is tested as underbosses attempt to take over his clan, much like how characters' loyalties in Les Mis are tested amongst turmoil.
I will accept this.
Oh, yes, but yeah, Les Mis.
It's a good time.
Yeah, but this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.